Love Mountain, written and narrated by Lee Shelton. Chapter 1. Bruh, the gas light just went off. Sammy groaned. He craned his neck past the headrest of his seat to look behind his car. Just to his luck, a ruby sedan was hot on his wheels, with nothing but mountainsides and hills flanking the road for miles. He'd be lucky to glean a crossroad as they rolled through the rural landscape of Tennessee. Joseph reclined in the passenger seat. An exit should be coming up soon. Hopefully there's a gas station. His dark brown eyes fixated on the mountains that stood just beyond his window. Every now and then, the wind would push the car to the side, causing Joseph to clutch the door. A smile crept onto Joseph's face. He might have been missing out on the fast-paced city life he was accustomed to, but nothing could beat being surrounded by the sight of beautiful mountains in the middle of nowhere, with the feeling of being chased by the slowly moving sun. The absence of all of the distractions allowed him to clear his mind and take in the moment. Here, Joseph was merely Joseph, and it had been a long time since he felt this type of peace of mind. "Hello, Earth to Southern supermodel," Sammy snarked while waving in Joseph's face. His umber complexion glistened in the harsh noon light. Joseph blinked rapidly. "Sorry, did you say something?" I got a little caught up. The creases in his navy blazer flattened as he shot upright. Had it been a week earlier, he would have gotten so flustered over his emotional absence. Now, everything seemed to be tied back to her. Sammy sighed. "Don't tell me it's Shannon again, man." He gave Joseph the side eye. It reminded Joseph of how his parents would look at him whenever he did something wrong as a child. And damn, did he feel more directionless than ever. He was 28 years old, had a physique that resembled the appearance of chiseled stone, softened by a pair of round eyes that were both warm and hypnotizing. But Joseph wasn't the husky, brooding type who bulled through the world with a snarl on his face. Women were drawn to him for his mellow gaze, but just a few words out of his mouth were all it took for them to be intimidated beyond recovery. Even though he constantly battled with overcoming his slightly introverted nature, Joseph constantly found great delight in getting to know more about a person and becoming in tune to their interests. And to his surprise, that made him come across as an old soul and a party pooper. Well, perhaps parties were less of where he should have persisted to search for love. "It's not about Shannon," Joseph responded truthfully. He really was enjoying his first rare moments outside of those daydreams. Sure, her cocoa skin and glimmering smile flashed across his eyes sometime, and her seductive laugh, and her pretty brown eyes that reminded him of a 90s R&B song. Nope, he definitely was not thinking about her. Sammy stared at him skeptically for some seconds. They said close friends grew to resemble each other after a while, and he was quite like his friend in appearance. Round nose, rich irises, and a beard that would make any guy jealous. His complexion was much deeper, though, and his facial hair fuller. He shrouded his twisted kinks in an oversized hoodie. "Joseph, I've been your best friend for over 10 years, bruh. Do you seriously think I can't tell when you're fronting?" He sighed. Joseph lowered his gaze to his lap. "I'm being real with you this time, though. Yeah, I haven't completely gotten over her like some emotionless robot with zero feelings. But what am I supposed to do? Run off into the night with some random girl so that I can mask my pain? Shannon was my girl," Joseph shot. "Boy, if you don't get out of here with this nonsense, of course you need to move on. You guys are OVER over, and you're still whimpering and huffing here like a little boy." Veins bulging at his temple, Sammy took a pause to recollect his breath. "I might be projecting a little bit out of my anger from Brittany choosing you over me back in college, but what am I saying that's wrong? Shannon was a dime, but she had too many layers. She was a mystery. You and I both know it wasn't meant to be." Joseph gulped loudly. As sharp as his friend's words were, he knew they had a tinge of truth. Sammy wasn't the kind to lash out over petty things. He was fired up because seeing his friend hurt pained him, and the last thing Joseph wanted was to worry the people he cared about. Smoothing a hand over his cropped coils, he grunted. I know, man. It's just tough to move on. I've been with this girl for so long that she's almost become a part of me. A squeamish sensation grew in Joseph. Uttering something that soft felt defeating, almost like he was letting down the one defense he had against the outside world. He didn't want to be seen as weak, desperate, pitiful. But what was he on his own? Sammy jibbed at him for stealing Brittany, which was an innocent inside joke. But as beautiful as she was, no girl got him giddy like Shannon did. Sammy swerved onto the first splitting road they'd seen in ages. You're scared to be alone, brother. And you love hard, which makes you too loyal. Loyalty is my superpower. Joseph chuckled weakly. Thankfully, Sammy eased the ambience with a burst of laughter. Loyalty is your superpower, huh? Okay. He turned into a road lined with brick storefronts and a mid-sized grocery store. One quirk about the South, sometimes annoying, other times appreciable, was that everything was spaced miles apart. But when you got to where you needed to go, you could guarantee you were going to find quadruple what you needed. The first plaza they passed boasted a nail salon, a soul food restaurant, a wedding boutique, all stacked into one long block. The car reached a stoplight. Thrumming his fingers on the wheel, Sammy noted, "You've never met Shannon's family." Joseph's chuckles died down. "You know it's true. Y'all been dating for years and you still ain't met her family." He said nothing as they finally pulled into a gas station, saving Joseph from having to acknowledge his years' worth of chasing the uncatchable. Was it really an illusion, though, if I enjoyed those times? He reasoned to himself as Sammy exited the car to pump the gas. Shannon pushed my boundaries. She had a way of taking me out of my conservative element. If only he learned how to make a girl like her stay. Shannon was a free spirit who swayed with the wind. The more Joseph thought of it, the more he realized they may have never been truly compatible outside of the music they created together. They were both crazy about one another. The love was real, but she was a wild card. Her faithfulness was never the question. It was just her resounding fear of being tied down. She was terrified of commitment. Her unpredictable nature exhilarated Joseph, but it also made him a bystander to her whims. She never seemed to expose her vulnerable state in his presence as badly as he strived to ease her fears. Maybe it stemmed from unspoken childhood trauma. She mentioned once or twice about being touched by an uncle as a child, but she would quickly change the subject and mask her emotion with what seemed to be a protective smile. It was a tough subject. The only time she seemed at peace was when she was singing. She was complicated, a mesmerizing beauty Joseph longed to be with. But she was always running, and that was a bitter pill his friend forced him to digest. Joseph's eyes darted to his right. Sammy was mouthing something through the window. Confused, Joseph rolled the window down so he could hear what he had to say. "Yeah, do you mind holding on to this for a second while I make a quick run to the restroom? All of this Where's Waldo with the gas station has got my tank on overflow, if you know what I mean." Joseph grimaced, nodding without a reply. Sammy took that as a yes and winked before waddling to the store. "At least we didn't run out of gas," Joseph sighed while exiting the car. He gripped the fuel pump by the handle and plunged it into the gas cartridge. As he waited for the gas to fill up, his eyes roamed the area. The weather was crisp. The gas station was surprisingly sparse for this time of the day. Joseph relished the silence. Calm was comfort, and comfort was little change. He didn't need to add extra stress to his life after having it upended a week ago. But am I happy with the way things are right now? Joseph's hold on the gas pump wavered. His budding music career was starting to blossom with the artist that he was currently managing. He started off as a musician himself, but found more fulfillment in building the careers of others around him in the industry. Shannon was one of the first artists that he signed to his management company. Their relationship was birthed through spending countless nights in the studio together, connecting through their passion for music. He loved creating with her. It was these moments that he felt the most intimate with her, these moments of harmony. And how the tables had turned, their love seemed to be out of tune. As the flow of the gasoline came to a slowing stop, Joseph hung the gas pump back on his rack and propped himself up against one of the nearby pillars. Sammy still wasn't anywhere in sight. With the skies ricocheting between cool clouds and the sweltering sun, he'd probably stopped by the fountain for a tall iced coffee. A grumble set into his stomach. He wouldn't say no to grabbing a small snack for the ride. The lot was empty, and it helped to kill time. He strolled into the gas station and straight up to one of the particular aisles. Sun chips never failed him. As dry as Sammy always complained of them being against his holy Doritos. Sammy did drive us all the way here, though, he admitted while snagging a jalapeno-flavored Doritos bag off the rack. He'd write it off as a thank you for covering the trip's gas. The clerk dinged his item and Joseph handed them a $5 bill. With that done, he strolled out of the front doors, hooking the Doritos under his shoulder while popping open his chip bag. He caught Sammy's silhouette through the passenger side window. His eyes were locked onto Sammy's car until he noticed a new car pull up on the other side of the gas pump. A leggy black woman got out and walked to the front of the vehicle and popped the hood. As she gazed down toward the engine, his eyes squinted at her side profile, jutted out perfectly from her snug dress. The woman wasn't just any passerby from around here. She was breathtakingly beautiful. Joseph, don't get so smitten already, he chided himself mentally. He hadn't even met this woman and he was already gaping at her beauty. She clutched her denim coat tightly as she pattered on her phone. Ugh, this car is on my last nerve, she grumbled while craning her neck around. Her pixie-cut coils bobbed to the beat of the wind. Parked directly outside the store, Sammy rolled down the passenger side window. Hey, he hissed at his friend. You gonna stand there like a creepster or get in here? Joseph blinked out of his daze, scanning the surroundings. He was grateful to know that nobody else could have noted him as a creep. Of course, he'd deal with Sammy later for nearly blowing his cover. With a deep breath, he clenched his fist and walked up to the mysterious woman's car. Even when frowning, the edges of her lips perked up in sultry flare. He could not let himself look like an idiot in front of her. Yeah, Dad, the car engine is acting up again, she huffed into her phone. She pushed up her glasses as she raised the car hood higher. It was only when he got near her that Joseph noticed there was a woman in the passenger seat of her car. By her features, the woman's mother. Joseph shoved his hands in his pockets, stopping by the driver's side of the car. He cleared his throat. Hey, I noticed your car seems to be having some problems. Do you need help with that? The girl glanced up at him, then glanced down, then stood up straight. If you could do that, I'll owe you. This car has just been, she sighed while stepping away from her vehicle. Joseph returned a lopsided smile and lowered to her car hood. It was times like this that he thanked his father for teaching him how to be good with his hands. Whether he got a flat tire on the countryside or heard a weird buzz in his engine, he knew just what to inspect to get his car into shape. I think I found it, he exclaimed breathily. He scanned the inside of the car once more to make sure he was right. The woman clapped happily behind him. Reeling closer, his nostrils tingled from the velvetness of her fragrance. And he never cared about what a girl wore or what not, but he could barely stay focused with her eyes burning into his back. Her eyes flitted across his body curiously, from the muscles that thickened in his unzipped hoodie to his chiseled jawline that clenched as he zoned in and out of his task. It felt like she was checking him out. No, Joseph told himself in his sweet nature. She's curious just like meeting a stranger would be. I'm deluding myself with the fantasy. What is it? She questioned into his ear. Fighting to keep his eyes on the car, he explained. The car battery is corroded, so it's not allowing a good connection to the car. That's why it won't start. Can you fix it? She asked in a nervous tone. Scratching his head in thought, he told her, I can. I just need to run back inside and see if they have something like baking soda or Coca-Cola would even work. Oh, my mom has a Coke, the woman squealed. Joseph got to his feet. Inside the car, the woman who looked to be her mother was halfway to raising the can to her lips. Following her gaze, he walked to the passenger side of the car and took the can of pop that had been extended. This is my mother, Michelle, who has graciously donated her coat to the cause. The older woman grinned at Joseph. And you better not use it all either. Yes, ma'am, he chuckled. He didn't notice at the time, but that was his first genuine laugh that day. He walked back to the hood of the car to start the repair, but something flashed in the corner of his eyes. He glimpsed to his right. Sammy, being a joker like usual, was gesticulating Natalie's voluptuous figure with his hands. He made googly eyes and mouthed, "Make a move!" Joseph quickly glanced away. Thankfully, Natalie was fetching a rag from her car while he made his way around. No need for her to see that. "By the way, I'm Joseph," he said when she wound back. The girl's smile stretched wider. "Joseph, I'm Natalie. Are you a local?" She passed him a rag as he poured the Coca-Cola. After a few drizzles, the battery took a fresher look. "There goes the corrosion," he grinned. "I'm actually from out in Houston, but you can try and start the car if you like." The girl smirked curiously. She perched herself half inside as she pressed the ignition button. As Joseph had predicted, the engine was now starting. "Wow, I think I need to hire you as my new repair guy," she joked with a grin as he got out of the car. "I have to give you my card. I have the best rates in the area," Joseph said with a flirty smile. Natalie shifted her weight onto one foot, resting her hands on her hips. "Hey, I'm from Houston too." "She's a Texas native too." An excited glimmer twinkled into Joseph's eyes. "Okay, so you from the H. What about you out here?" We're en route to a family reunion. Thankfully, we left early with this old bucket of a car." Natalie and Joseph formed a chorus of laughter. As she clutched her slim waist, Joseph admired how at peace the girl looked. Somewhat like Shannon when she would be caught up in the melody of the music. Natalie's shiny teeth were tucked away by her plump smile. "It's really great we ran into you here. Again, I can't thank you enough for this." Joseph shrugged, already starting for Sammy's car. "Like I said, I got the best rates in the area. But I seriously wish y'all a wonderful reunion." Natalie laughed as her mother joined in on the fun. "And hey, young man, you still owe me a soda. Didn't even save me a sip." The three laughed once more as Joseph waved goodbye. A rush heated his body as he strolled to the car. Natalie. He played with the girl's name on his tongue. The three syllables ran a rhythm from his mouth. She was definitely a personality he'd remember. "Oh, look, we're already scoring hot chicks at the gas station," Sammy joked when Joseph got into his car. "You've already got her lined up for a date, don't you?" Joseph averted his gaze. "Well, I didn't get her number, so no." In the motion of revving up his engine, Sammy rotated his body to Joseph's side with a jaw-dropped expression. "You didn't get that beauty's number? Boy, if you ain't about the dumbest. It seemed like y'all had a connection." Joseph trailed off. "We just met." His voice faltered to muster some excuse. Though they spent a few minutes together, the tension that built up between him and Natalie was stronger than anything he'd felt the past week, besides his breakup grief, obviously. But he also didn't think about that when he was fixing her battery. He thrummed his fingers atop the window ledge. "Natalie, Natalie, Natalie," he repeated mentally. He could still feel the giddiness in his body after the encounter. Never had he experienced a rush this great after a moment so brief. More than that, her face was engraved in the forefront of his mind. He kept imagining her caramel cheeks as they glowed under the sun, and her delicious figure that grazed his body as they got close. He wondered if she was lit up by his touch too, or if he was the only one lingering over their meeting. A smirk crept onto his lips. He'd never been the superstitious type, but something told him today wouldn't be the last time they saw each other, and he couldn't wait to see that become a reality. Chapter 2. Memphis skies were painted a warm indigo, with palm-sized lanterns strung across the trees. Each cylindrical light was knotted to a branch by a thread, and of those threads, a mosaic of twisting and tangling rope was formed. Awe quirked Joseph's lips as he took in the twilight view. Perhaps booking this outdoor venue was not so bad after all. The performing band clef note played with such a groove. Even Joseph found himself swinging to the beat. Bang, bang, bang. He was definitely going to give them the props after the show. It was such a vibe. The crowd was mesmerized by the melodies and harmonies saturating the atmosphere. Girls swayed their hair in the air. Men bobbed their heads to the rhythm, and the entire crowd was synchronized in the moment. Joseph had to tense up his body to avoid being squished while he searched for his friend. A corny Lakers hoodie, old J's, and a nape that's gotta see a fresh cut. Joseph was counting off his friend's features before he heard his name being called. Joseph! His eyes darted to the right, where Sammy was laughing with a girl on his shoulder. She had copper skin and a big bubblegum afro. Look at this girl over here. I told you the art shows bring out all the fun people. As he glowed about the woman, she posed as to flaunt her customized embroidered clef note sweater and exclusive woven bracelet. Hey, you're a big fan of clef note? Joseph asked. The woman didn't have to blink to blurt her answer. A big fan? I'm a huge fan of clef note, and I can't wait for them to go on tour. Turning so her back faced Joseph's gaze, she continued to passionately sing while holding her drink in the air. I think I'm dreaming too much. Grinning, Sammy nudged Joseph's shoulder. Actually, you'd be happy to know my friends. Sorry, but I've got to pull my friend aside for a quick second. Joseph cut Sammy off from his blatant attempt at fan leeching, dragging him off to the side of the crowd. Sammy grumbled. Hey, man. Didn't you see how hot that chick was? We could have hollered at the whole crew if you ain't sabotaged me with your jumpy self. Joseph sighed like an impatient but guilty parent. You know I love to help you get all the girls in the world through the connections I have, but look, my talents are like my babies. I can't be getting them into trouble when I promised I would put their success first. Sammy rolled his eyes. Fine. Cap for them boys all you want. The South is full of fine shorties. He pushed past Joseph as he chuckled to himself. Never changed, Sammy. People always said that best friends began to mirror each other after spending a lot of time together. But there was one glaring chasm between the two that Joseph secretly envied. How quickly Sammy was able to move on from girls who caught his interest. He didn't even waste a minute mourning the black beauty he'd met just a few moments ago. In fact, the flicker in his eyes told Joseph that he'd be on to the next chase in less time than it took for him to rag on Joseph for being a party pooper. If only I had even half his level of confidence, Joseph reflected. His heart panged with the memory of him sitting by Shannon in the recording booth. They were doing a demo of his earliest rendition of the song Clef Note was playing right now. Her dove-like vocals softened the heavy bass, as Shannon's vocals did for every recording she graced. Her presence was stunning. She could make the most innocuous pieces become ethereal. Joseph rubbed his temple. Crap, here I go again, he thought as he returned his eyes to the performance. Clef Note was on cue to wrap up the show with the next act. He was happy he got to support them for the bulk of their performance, even if his attention kept straying to that X again. Maybe he needed a breather. Releasing a deep exhale, Joseph shoved his hands in his pockets and started for the venue's art walk. A more tranquil change of activity could clear the fogginess in his head, he reasoned. The art walk was rich with canvas dressed up by local artists. One painting was a composite of beads tacked together to feign an African-American woman in the 80s. Her lush afro was like a cloud to the bright landscape she foregrounded. Splashes of blue highlighted the edges of her mane. She tended to a basket of sunflowers she'd perched up on her curled up knees and wore a paisley print dress that fell to her ankles. Joseph lost track of his steps as he gazed at more and more paintings. Some were illusions like the first one, made from little bulbs or gadgets that measured up to a greater meaning. Others hid their images in the most subtle of fashions. One painting, for example, appeared to be totally black until Joseph glimpsed the contour of a heart. From there, he spotted more and more drawings tucked into the dim background. Things people can do with a paintbrush and some liquid, Joseph thought as he chuckled in admiration. He finally stopped in front of an easel that was in the middle of being set up. He just realized he had walked through the entire northern wing of the art show, and a good 20 minutes had passed by while he was at it. Damn, he said, raising his eyes from his watch. He really wished he had allotted more time to walk through the gallery portion of the show. As he slowly turned to walk back, his eyes flitted over a familiar face in the gallery, then halted on them immediately. Natalie? He was robbed of belief. If that curvaceous, beautiful woman was the one he just met at the gas station, miracles truly were possible. For a brief moment, it was as if time stood still when the two of them made eye contact. And just like that, the contagious smile slowly overcame both of them. This was too good to be true. She hooked a beige satchel over her shoulder, the snakeskin complementing her heels and tight buckle, as if she ricocheted between settling on a dramatic or casual flair. Her look was toned down with a pair of baby blue jeans and a cropped denim jacket. She'd cloaked a floral white bustier underneath. Joseph laughed as she strolled up to him. Are you stalking me? He joked as her grin stretched even wider. Unfortunately, I have better things to do than to follow cute guys who fix my car, she teased. Jesus, this girl knows how to play with the man's heart. A flustered Joseph mused. My family reunion is at this hotel. Joseph shrugged lightheartedly. Well, that's twice in one day. It's nice to meet you again. I'm Joseph. I'm Natalie, Natalie responded with a half curtsy. She couldn't find anything to cling on to besides the wings of her pockets, which made her look like a goofy but hot woman. Joseph pointed down the long north end corridor. One of the bands I manage is performing here. Did he sound like a glaring hypocrite after the way he dipped on Sammy earlier? Yes, but he was in the rush of spluttering whatever came first to his mind. They could start talking about the weather forecast, and he'd recall how his grandfather met Neil Armstrong before he went to the moon. Hopefully Natalie would look, or should he have said, here, past his jumble of thoughts. Oh, I didn't know you were the musical type, Natalie remarked with a ooh. Let me guess, you're a bassist? Joseph cocked an eyebrow. Why would you say that? Because you're good with your hands, she teased. Again, Joseph's chest fluttered like he'd just finished his morning cardio. He really needed to muster a witty comeback. He gauged the woman would be willing to talk a little while longer. Want to take a look around? It looks like they finished setting up the second wing. He glanced at the easel that was being fumbled with earlier. A watercolor painting now stood atop its wooden base. I'll have you know I'm a creative myself. Browsing art sounds fun. Natalie let out a chesty laugh as she flanked Joseph around the gallery. They pointed and grinned at illustrations, sometimes encountering photographs that were of places they drove by in Tennessee. Joseph commented, I can't forget this view of the Great Smoky. The orange cast on the forested peaks drew a nostalgic call to his first day in the state. He and Sammy got there in the evening when the road signs were getting darker and roads were becoming emptier. Then it felt like it was just him and nature. Natalie nodded, her voice laced with wonder. There's something so intimate about being out in the mountains. You're surrounded by nothing but trees and animals. Nobody's there to distract you. Heck, most of the time you can barely get a signal. It's the only time you can truly be alone. Joseph felt a warmness in his palms. It was at that moment that he realized that he clasped Natalie's soft hand in his. It was like a natural gravitation between them, in the same way she talked of how the mountains could put up this surreal boundary between life and yourself. They were in their own small universe, looking into the world from their lens. Keeping a gentle hold on her hand, he trailed after her as she sprang for a bright painting. This is beautiful, she gasped. The illustration was an abstract drawing of a woman's face. Usually, Joseph would need to tilt his head to notice the interesting quirks of an art piece. With this one, however, he was starstruck without needing to squint further. Yeah, that is amazingly gorgeous. They have some great talent out here in Tennessee. Him and Natalie pattered about the colorful hues that accented the flows and strokes of the woman's hair. The conversation was so absorbing that Joseph hadn't noticed his friend passing by. Now on to his third potential of the night, Sammy glimpsed Joseph with the girl he met at the gas station. He smiled to himself. slinking away from their line of sight. After they got through most of the gallery, Joseph stopped by a concession stand. The buttery aroma made him realize how long they traipsed around without stopping for a break. He looked down at Natalie. "Hey, you feeling hungry?" he asked. For the sake of preserving the integrity of the art pieces in the gallery, not much was sold within their vicinity besides bite-sized snacks and overpriced kombuchas for the more bougie folk. They'd have to travel outside of the venue if they wanted to buy anything capable of satiating an adult appetite. Natalie, to Joseph's surprise, burst into laughter after his question. "Sorry, that just sounded so hilarious to me," she explained between breaths. Joseph reworded himself. "Would you like to get something to eat?" He knew his stomach was rumbling louder than thunder, but he guessed that he was the only person who dashed into art shows without any conception of stealing a bite beforehand. Even with his new angle, Natalie wasn't ready to ease her playfulness. She swayed tauntingly, purring. "Are you asking me out on a date?" Joseph flushed. He struggled for a direct reply. Was it a date? Of course it was. The minute he got home, he'd be cursing the skies for tripping up in front of this beautiful woman. For better or for worse, she saved him the task of owning up to his desires. "Okay, let's go out to eat." She gripped his hand tighter as they trickled out of the venue with other visitors. Joseph clenched his jaw. "I dropped the ball on that one, but I'm definitely going to make this dinner a night to remember." Chapter 3. Natalie slid a forkful of pasta between her lips. The dish was coated in a creamy sauce, penne alla vodka, as Joseph rightly imagined she'd like, complemented with a serving of garlic herb bread. Natalie moaned as she chomped the food down to bits. Her mauve lipstick glistened under their booth's gold light fixture. "Wow, I figured you liked penne alla vodka, but I didn't know you'd love it this much," Joseph chuckled. "Now I'm starting to feel a little jealous." Natalie giggled. She carefully dabbed a napkin over her lips and sampled her red wine. "I really need to start dining more often. One fancy restaurant is worth a dozen splurges at Dunkin's." Blanched, Joseph dropped his fork like she just compared Selena Gomez to Beyonce. "On what planet has Dunkin' Donuts ever counted as good food?" He sucked his teeth loudly. The comparison repulsed him too much to even consider. Natalie gasped. "Now you can't be lying on me like you've never taken a late night just because you had to do a last-minute run for their donuts?" Joseph puffed his chest like a stubborn child. "Nope, nobody never. I don't even eat none of that cheap fried nonsense. It's only the fresh Italian bakeries for me." "Ah, I know you're playing with me right now, because there's no way a brother's gonna act like he's fine dining every breakfast." Joseph countered. "Says the fashionista. I know you're eating better than I do." Natalie glanced down at her outfit. "Okay, I've had these jeans since I got into law school, and my bag is a hand-me-down." Joseph cocked an eyebrow. "Law school?" His lips tipped up with heightened interest. Sexy and intelligent was a deadly combination. Natalie fixated on her plate, absently fiddling with the stem of her wine glass. "I've always loved to see the courtroom battles on TV, and digging up dirt on enemies is pretty much my gig." She and Joseph enjoyed a chorus of laughter. Sadly for me, my dad was not too big a fan of the bar. He wanted me to go to med school because our family is basically a long dynasty of medicine practitioners. Leaning forward, Joseph took a pensive expression. "That must have been a tough dilemma." Natalie sighed. "It was." And meeting his gaze added, "But I knew I wanted to be my own person, and that would not happen if I kept following in my father's shadow." Joseph couldn't argue with that. His father was also an old school, you do as I say and mirror what I do type of parent. It was not like he leaped into the music world with an impenetrable foundation of support like some of his peers. Still, their situations weren't entirely the same. Coming from medicine meant coming from money. Natalie might not have been one of the Waltons, but she surely grew up in a McMansion with an always full lunchbox and a college fund ready before she even had a bib hung around her neck. She didn't have the guilt of her parents' sacrifice looming over her conscience. But I guess, Joseph contemplated, she had her own sort of pressure to break out of. A glint of curiosity lightened her eyes. So are you in law school right now? She asked Joseph. Oh, that's a story long enough to unravel the whole night, Joseph thought in jest. To keep things sweet and short, I was doing an undergrad in architecture while I did music production on the side. I eventually made the tough decision to drop out of school so I could pursue my passion full time. His eyes glittered with the excitement as he spoke. Once, he would have cowered in a sea of six-figure suits who stopped by this restaurant right after they signed a posh deal for their bosses in their downtown skyscraper. Now, he sat even taller than the highest paid of them, owing partly to his muscular, tall physique, but just as importantly to his satisfaction in how things turned out. He was no longer that Joe who keeps nagging you to listen to his single on SoundCloud. Natalie jittered as he went on too. It wasn't just his daring looks that captured her attention, but how he geeked out on what he loved. She was, like how Joseph had slightly exaggerated, en route to snagging a great job after graduation. She didn't need guys to charm her with contracts on how much they made over the Los Angeles showings last weekend. She needed to be noticed. She needed to be confided in on what mattered. And in the little time they'd known each other, it was like her and Joseph got closer than some people she talked to since college. Joseph folded his arms on the table, smiling. I used to record my own rap music, but now I'm doing more artist management. Natalie whistled. Oh, you a rapper? Joseph smirked. I can spit a bar or two. Natalie rolled her eyes and Joseph indulged in his dry pun. She toyed with the remnants of her pasta. I've got to say, I'm jealous of your family. I know that standing behind a guy like you, there's got to be two parents who just believe in their son and raise you to go after what your intuition tells you to. My dad is a total control freak. Joseph grimaced. No family is perfect, but I can only imagine the strict expectations that come with the family of doctors. Natalie blew out the tension inside of her. Oh, I can't even get started. And you know what really kicks off the pressure? My mom has been sick lately. And when I say sick, I don't mean no cold. She was diagnosed with kidney failure a few years back. I still remember the day I got tested, hoping I could help her somehow. Her voice cracked as she reached the climax of her story. Joseph reached across the table to squeeze her palm. Natalie smiled weakly, continuing. The results said I'm not compatible. After everything she's done for me, I can't do this one thing to ease her pain. Joseph squeezed her palm harder. Natalie, I bet your mother feels stronger every day, knowing you're right up there fighting for her by honoring the family's legacy. I mean, becoming a lawyer. How many bums out there can achieve even half of what you've done? I say, keep kicking butt in school and let fate take its course. I guarantee an organ match will come up quicker than you think. Natalie forced a chuckle. The list is pretty long, but I guess I'll hold out hope. She raised her wine for another sip. If only guys in my school were as mature as you. Trust me, I was a total goof-off before I turned 28, but there's no way none of Houston's bachelors haven't caught your heart yet. Smiling, Natalie smacked a fist on her chest. I'm the girl that got away. No, but seriously, the boys down south are not bad. I just couldn't commit to anything like dating while I was plowing through my courses. But what about you? You look like the playboy my mama told me to stay away from. Joseph lowered his head, bashful. You gassing me up. I actually just got out of a nasty breakup. Natalie was at a loss for words. Oh God, I didn't mean to press a fresh wound. No, it's fine, Joseph interjected. We might have overestimated the chemistry we had with each other. It's really hard to look back on those times and accept we weren't meant to be. But what can we do, right? Joseph appended a gentle laugh at the end to lighten the mood, but he only betrayed his bruised heart. Natalie placed her free hand atop the hand Joseph had used to warm her other one. I'm sure you'll find the one. We all need time. Joseph strained a smile. I hope so. Blanketed with silence, the two finished up the last of their dishes before the waitress came over to collect their bill. Joseph covered the dinner. Take it as my thanks for being a good conversationalist, he assured Natalie as she fought to hand the lady her credit card. They walked side by side out in the cold night. Seeing Natalie clutch her denim jacket, Joseph removed his blazer and draped it over her shoulders. You didn't have to, she started, shushed by the finger he covered over her lips. It's okay. I'm a winter baby. Cold nights are nothing for me. He beamed as Natalie leaned into his shoulder for extra comfort. Her plush coils tickled his collarbone, warming up his lightly clothed chest. He wondered what it'd be like to sink his hands into her hair, just letting her doze off by his side as he patted her to sleep. She stayed awake to the rhythm of his heart. It was lively and invigorating. His cologne spiced the air, too. Without effort, her hand that found support on his chest wandered over his stomach. Her imagination wandered for a few seconds before tuning back into the moment. Joseph's abs contracted as her fingers brushed his six-pack. His abs were bulging and hard, just like his arms. Natalie smiled discreetly. Had her mom not been waiting up for her, she would like to have stayed like this longer. Joseph was just as intoxicated by her touch. Had he not overheard two passerbys mention the name of her hotel, he wouldn't have stopped to glimpse the hotel sign next to them. Looks like we're here, he said with a trace of disappointment. They both parted from their embrace, a linger of attachment stalling their entry. Seems like it, Natalie replied dryly. As if boulders were suspended on their shoulders, the two lumbered up the hotel stairwell at a sluggish speed. By the time they reached the revolving door, it must have been well past midnight. Joseph knew he couldn't end the night like this. There was more to be said, more to be experienced, and after this evening, he couldn't depend on the flicker of luck for them to meet again. Hey, he said as Natalie strolled to the lobby's reception. She craned her head back. Savoring a deep breath, Joseph blurted out, I was wondering if I could get your number. Maybe we can hang out when we get back to Houston? Natalie paused, tapping her chin like she needed to think this one over. Joseph felt his stomach fall. Had he read the mood wrong? Or was he just the worst at making advances? Upon confirming she tricked him, Natalie laughed. Of course I'll give you my number. Joseph pouted as he strolled up to exchange numbers with her. You're lucky you have such a cute laugh, he grumbled to himself. Yet again, Joseph was forced to contend with being flustered by Natalie's boldness. After dropping off Natalie at the lobby of her hotel, Joseph met up with Sammy in the venue's parking lot. It just so happened that he showed up in the nick of time. The event coordinators were planning to guilt-trip guests into volunteering for the cleanup of the site, which struck disaster for Sammy, who needed some way to excuse himself from his ultra-vegan diet soon. Joseph swooped in and reminded him of their early hotel checkout the coming morning, and so the rest was history. But like I was saying, I think it's too early to take this girl to the Caribbean when we barely made it past first base. You know what I'm saying? Sammy rambled. He'd been rambling all 15 minutes of he and Joseph's car ride. Joseph mumbled for the 1,000th time in response. He snickered as he scrolled down his phone, tapping the screen even faster than he'd managed to do for the past consecutive minutes. Sammy pivoted his eyes between Joseph and the road. Since they were just apart in the heart of the tourist district, the streets remained full and the skyline bright. Not break of dawn bright, but colorful enough for the two to make out the shapes of the buildings and the wandering pedestrians. Tennessee was mostly a state of sprawling greenery and oversized estates, but recent developments were working to transform the capital into a metropolitan hub. So, what has your attention? Sammy asked as he stared underneath an overpass. The shroud of darkness seemed to interfere with Joseph's phone signal. Joseph blinked out of his daze. I'm just talking to Natalie. Wait, did I already tell you about her? Sammy chuckled. The girl you helped at the gas station, right? I saw you two chatting it up at the art gallery. I thought y'all had a spark the first time y'all ran into each other. Joseph smiled, reclining in the passenger seat. Maybe this is a sign I should take you by your word more often, because today, or yesterday, whatever, was one of the best nights of my life. When I tell you we just talked about everything, I mean everything. There was no holding back, No BS to impress, none of the fake stuff. She was so real. And I felt like I learned things about myself while I learned about her background. Sammy replied, "Sounds like a keeper. And I'm glad you know that I'm not playing when it comes to my romance advice. I don't just hand out readings like that for free. And really, you should have got our number at the gas station." Chapter 4. 3 days had passed since the art event. Joseph was back in Houston, where the sun shined, but the people never slept. It was good to be back where good old Southern hospitality came before all else. Joseph was strolling around his studio when he felt a buzz in his pocket. He figured it might have been his mom, and his eyes popped wide open when he glimpsed who the caller actually was. Natalie, he exhaled with relief. As much as he loved sweet old Ma, he really couldn't shake Natalie's face out of his mind, nor could he forget about her beautiful smile, infectious laugh, and impossibly voluminous hair. The woman was like a drug to him. He was hooked on her innocent seductiveness. "Hello?" he said as soon as the ringer quieted. His body jittered to hear her speak into his ears again, the faint husk of her voice steering his pulse. She coyly delayed herself, saying, "Hey, Joseph." Her voice was hoarser than usual, like she'd just woken up. "What are you up to this evening?" Joseph shrugged, leaning onto her pillow in the recording studio. He rented a medium-sized space for his business since most of the money-making took place in the recording booth. "Nothing really. You?" The excitement he roused in her was palpable. "I was calling to see if you'd like to grab something to eat later," Natalie confessed. For how bold she was whenever she caught Joseph off guard, her volume waned timidly. And hearing this turned Joseph on even more. "Is that a date?" he smirked. Natalie stayed silent for a moment. "Looks like you're the one tied up now," Joseph mused proudly to himself. She reluctantly said, "Our meeting is whatever you like to make it. I won't argue if you choose to interpret it a certain way." Joseph shook his head, beaming. "You have a lawyer's way with your words." He could imagine Natalie curtsying as she quipped, "I'll take that as a compliment. I'll see you at the address I'm about to send you." Joseph's cheeks were sore by the time he ended the call. There was never an instance he'd hear Natalie's voice and not grin like a child. She simply fired him up. Her magnetism was effortless. He glanced at his watch before striding to the recording booth. He knew exactly the song he'd be writing this week. And I kid you not, the girl then fell over and made us call the paramedics so they could toss her back up again. Joseph laughed loudly. Natalie clutched her stomach as she reeled forward with laughter. "Oh my God, stop." She gasped between laughs. Joseph only laughed even louder. Waitresses and other tables craned their heads in worry, but he didn't care. Natalie didn't mind either, as they were both too tranced in their connection. Joseph toyed with the lampshade that was fixed under the table's large parasol. Earlier, it shielded the two from the scorching evening sun. Now, it was no more than a maroon decoration with fairy light strung across its edges. Joseph still enjoyed the view they got from this seating placement. Their terraced table looked down on the bustling streets of Houston, and to their right, a sliding glass door was only slightly cracked ajar for their privacy. "So, your music," Natalie posed curiously. Her nude bodice perfectly hugged her figure. The flouncy skirt that flowed from her waist gave a sweet but sexy look. Joseph fought to not peer at her plunging neckline, at least not every 3 seconds. "What do you usually have your artists write about?" He knit his eyebrows in confusion. "Me? I try not to take on a new client, generally unless the artist is new and trying to find their voice." Natalie's eyebrows were perked up. "So you do have some type of vibe you're going for, right? Neo-soul, underground rap?" She propped herself up on an elbow, adding at a lower volume, "Don't worry, I won't slip it to the competition. Indie bands are so out of style, right?" Joseph chuckled. "Well, every manager has an image that they're better at pushing than others. There's a reason the artists I work with gravitate towards me. I'm definitely not one of the mega managers that can promise you fortune and fame, but I'd call myself semi-okay at getting a good reach for people in R&B and intellectual hip-hop. But let me flip the table. What about you? Natalie pointed at herself, laughing. What about me? Oh, hell no, I'm not touching a microphone or music contract for the rest of my life. Joseph crossed his arms on the table. His muscles looked like they were about to rip the threads of his shirt from their seams. Like my mom says, there's a singer in everybody. But that ain't what I'm talking about right now. He pointed down at the purse in her lap. I think you mentioned wanting the dramatic cases in the courtroom, right? Are you trying to be a celebrity lawyer? Or are you going corporate? I guess I'd say I really like the criminal division, just because I feel like it has the most impact on our judicial system and society as a result. Upon catching Joseph's one eyebrow lifted expression, she blurted, Crap, am I throwing too much law speak at you? Joseph waved his hands. No, continue. I just like the way you look when you talk about your passion. He could have sworn he saw her cheeks tint a deep scarlet. Luckily for her, she was able to fiddle with the coil in front of her face so her emotions were hidden from scrutiny. Sharply sucking in the air, she muttered, Damn, you're becoming a good flirt. She then said, So far, I'm really enjoying the criminal justice route, but I also really like art. And corporate lawyers get to dabble in a lot of copyright cases and contest what is creative infringement and what can be excused to natural overlap. If you ever need to start a client when you graduate, I know my artists could benefit from a few lessons on IP protection. Intended as a joke, Joseph blushed when he realized the innuendo in his offer. Thankfully, Natalie cackled like the easygoing person she was. Sure, I'll keep the lessons visual and fun. He slumped over even more embarrassingly into his seat as she burst into greater hysteria. After an extended bout of chatter, the table mellowed. Their bellies were stuffed with pasta and oven-roasted eggplant. Joseph felt like he could taste the rawness of tomato paste even as he chugged down his third glass of wine, and nothing should have been able to beat its bitter overtones. His palate had clearly gotten too used to the fast food atrocities he denied ever patronizing. Upscale eater my butt, he scolded himself as the treacly flavor of Krispy Kreme tingled his palate. Joseph inhaled the crisp draft that blew their tablecloth. The weather was perfectly cool. He dressed semi-casual for his date, wearing a black, shiny pair of shoes along with his pleated trousers and an indigo dress shirt. The cuffs of his top were rolled above his forearms, tightening the clasps on his biceps. Natalie carefully stole a glance at a discreet enough angle to feign she was eyeing his wristwatch. The time. Suddenly she stiffened in her chair. Oh God, I forgot. She frantically scrambled for her phone in her purse. Raising the screen to her eyes, she sighed. I have got to get home early tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'm taking my mom to a dialysis appointment. Joseph rested his hands on hers. I wouldn't want to have you held up. Good luck, okay? Natalie bobbed her head eagerly. Joseph noticed she was a lot more optimistic on the topic of her mother's treatment than when he'd first brought it up. Maybe they were getting closer to a good donor. He'd love to know what was behind her enlivened spirit, but seeing her agony when she spoke on her mother's illness steered him from prying any more than she encouraged him to. For now, he let their dates be a time for them to forget about the troubles of their inner lives, a time to really bond with each other and discover they were more than the tribulations life threw at them one by one. Chapter 5. 3, 2, 1, cheese! Natalie nestled deeper into Joseph's chest as they posed for a picture inside of one of the photo booths at the shopping mall. She made a different goofy face with each flash of the camera. This led to each of their photos being funny outtakes that displayed their playful personalities. Joseph burst into laughter as the photos printed. I'm definitely getting this one framed. He teased as she elbowed him for raising the ideal. Natalie pouted. I'll sue you if I ever see this in a public place. Joseph smirked. Guess I'll just have to hang this in my bedroom then. Natalie smiled flirtatiously as she clung to his arm as they walked side by side. Since their first meetup in Houston, the two were drenched in back-to-back affection. It was funny, Joseph pointed out, how Natalie suggested she stayed away from relationships because she could never find the time. Now, there was always time. They couldn't stay away from one another, even if they wanted to. When Natalie was busy with tests and heavy homework days, they'd schedule bite-sized meetups around her obligations. At one point, she pulled an all-nighter at Joseph's place while he acted as a foot massage therapist and a placeholder student for her review. They ping-ponged unit concepts like she was the teacher and he was the pupil. I don't know, teacher. I think I'm getting a little tired from all this foot rubbing. Joseph yawned and his head lolled downward. Natalie held herself up just as strongly as she had after chugging her first shot of espresso. I think you should pay more attention in class, she said while lifting her foot from his hand. She sprawled herself across the couch and patted her side. Come sit. Joseph smiled. He washed his hands and obeyed her beckoning. Does this mean I did well? Natalie scoffed. You barely had to get anything right. Joseph shrugged. I think that says more about your teaching abilities than it does about myself. With a cunning gait, he strode up to where Natalie had laid down. She gripped the collar of his loose tunic. Joseph felt a lot more domineering than usual. He wasn't the gentle, quick-to-fluster giant. He prowled towards her like she was his prey, his muscled 6 feet of height becoming a lot starker as she cowered on his couch. She curled her legs up to her chin. He stopped above her, placing one hand on the backrest of the sofa and the other by her hip. Don't bad students deserve extra tutorials? His voice had lowered to a thigh-clenching growl. Natalie licked her lips as she thought. I think your behavior deserves some attention, she whispered. She slowly got up from her bum. The distance between her plump lips and his closed into a speck. The curvature of her lips looked extra delicious from Joseph's perspective. He imagined grappling her tiny frame, enveloping her body in his as he feasted on her passion. Suddenly, her lips upturned in a smirk. She shot a finger up between their mingling breaths. But for now, we have to focus on studying. As quickly as they both heated up, she flipped to her side and began turning through the pages of her textbook. Can we review IP laws next? Joseph froze in place, stunned. Then he robotically got off her body. Damn, you're slick, he chuckled. He didn't know whether to be deflated or impressed by her level of self-restraint. School comes first, and Joseph? Before Joseph could utter a reply, Natalie sprung to peck his lips. Thank you for everything, she smiled sweetly. Joseph beamed like a child who'd gotten to taste the sweetness of the sweetest candy. I'd stay up all night if I got to taste more of that, he joked as he prepared for another round of test practice. The two ventured through more lines of law inquiry before Natalie drifted off to sleep. Joseph captured her sleeping body in his arms. The soft rhythms of her breaths hummed a lullaby to his ears. He was swiftly fast asleep. Natalie strutted down the mall escalator, looping her arm in Joseph's when she reached the bottom. They circled around the Galleria Mall in search of entertainment. And that wasn't scarce in the vibrant complex. In a sea of luxury name brand stores, fashion boutiques, expensive eateries, and America's breeziest salespeople, it was hard to walk out of this mall without swiping the credit card one too many times. Joseph and Natalie had challenged themselves to go window shopping. In other words, browsing with the impossible responsibility of not buying a single thing. By the time Joseph pointed out a few mannequins and chatted with a few employees as if he was really going to buy something, both he and Natalie's stomachs were growling like beasts. Restaurants shouldn't count, right? He told Natalie as they passed the Rock's Bar, an eatery specializing in Cajun food. His facial muscles twitched from the fresh jambalaya wafting to his nose. Natalie mimed herself knocking the gavel on an invisible judge bench. I hereby rule it inhumane to ask of any civilian to resist the impossible, exquisite flavoring of Cajun cuisine. Switching back to normal, Natalie, she said, There, our challenge is over. Joseph laughed as they dashed to the host stand. Once they got a table, they pigged out on, you guessed it, a heap of jambalaya, a side of crab cakes, and a skinny pour of tequila. That was one addition they weren't too sure of, but they couldn't say no to a tropical pick-me-up. A few days later, they went to the Houston Museum of African American Culture and learned about the city's ancestral inhabitants. A layer of awe was cast upon them as they brushed the chemises the woman used to don before sleep, the wooden slabs young men would write on for school, and the hopeful journals of Americans who hungered for a future greater than what had been set before them. Tying her affinity for the arts with Joseph's fascination with automobiles, Natalie suggested that they visit the Art Car Museum next. Minted vehicles and hunks of metal that looked as if they'd been exploited in a game of paintball was strewn across the gallery. Joseph gaped at the display cases, Natalie intrigued right alongside him. Weeks of spontaneous dates lapsed into months. They were on the brink of spending their second full month in Houston together when they went out to a stage play. It was a New Orleans rendition of Beauty and the Beast, where the beauty was the intelligent daughter of a Creole businessman, while the beast was a once respected African-American banker who was exiled due to greed. When the curtain was minutes away from being drawn, Joseph felt a weight plop onto his shoulder. He glanced down at his right, her lips smoothly parted, an afro pillowy like her cheeks. Natalie snoozed as the actors pranced around the stage. Joseph gently jostled her awake when most of the audience had milled out of the concert hall. Natalie shook her head in confusion, murmuring, "Is it finished?" Joseph softly laughed. "Yes, I'll take it you're not the biggest fan of theater." Natalie blushed. "I couldn't understand what was happening halfway through the musical, all right? Plus, all the singing has got to get tacky at some point," she retorted defensively. Joseph relished in how cute she looked when her cheeks puffed up. "Whatever you say," he teased as she nudged his biceps. She reflected how hard it was. "I've been working out more recently," he commented in light of her reaction. "Has it been noticeable?" "Whatever you say," Natalie repeated back to him, flipping her hair. Joseph smirked and followed her to the foyer. Joseph grinned, hurrying to unfurl his phone from his pocket. The chimes of his ringtones were now like a military horn to his ears. Well, perhaps not, as he found them livening but not torturous. He hoped to see a certain caller ID before he even glimpsed the screen. Natalie, please be Natalie," he prayed in his head, and then he checked. Natalie was calling. With his grin stretched even wider, Joseph picked up her call. Her line was muffled by the blare of a loud machine. It sounded like a dryer. "Hey, Joseph, I'm finishing up in the beauty salon right now. Would you be able to come and pick me up?" Natalie's temperate volume could barely be heard over whatever was happening in the background. Joseph was straining his ears and still couldn't make out a word she said. "Sorry, I heard something about a salon," Joseph shouted. He was whisked back to when his mother would call him to run errands while she fixed up her braids. And in that moment, he realized what Natalie was referring to. "I'm on my way," he blurted. Natalie shouted, "Thanks, I'll send you the address." Joseph was hit with a wave of hairspray the second he stepped into Monica's hair salon. Immediately affronted with burning nostrils and a parched throat, Joseph prayed no one would take his coffin fit as a knock at their styling. He scanned the room for a small diamond-shaped face. The place was a cornucopia of scents and smiles. No matter when he strolled into a black beauty salon, it never took long for him to understand why his mother wished to pass her time alone while she was there. Even for the girls who weren't having rich herbal treatments massaged into their scalps, there was a charm that made their appointments a sort of mandatory check-in. A chance to chat with the girls, to feel loved, to get pampered. Mustering enough focus to snap out of his awe, Joseph squeezed past a pink apron lady who was buffing a woman's nails. The nail polish in her trolley jangled as the drawers hit his hip. "Ah," he remarked under his breath. The salon was small but packed. Joseph couldn't say he knew much about Monica's hair salon or the plaza it was built inside of, as he rarely visited this part of town, but there was a distinct scent he could recognize in any black beauty establishment. The aroma of hair sheen saturated the dense haze that filled the atmosphere. The sound of hair dryers blowing in the background created a constant yet subtle white noise. "Joseph," a woman called. He froze between a station where a couple of women were hooded in bubble caps and haphazardly abandoned trolleys. Joseph launched his eyes in the direction of the voice. In the hindmost corner of the store, Natalie sat cross-legged in front of a worker who looked to be around her age. A plastic shawl was buttoned around Natalie's neck. Her beautician seemed to be applying finishing touches, gliding a pair of scissors around the nape of Natalie's head. Joseph beamed as she approached her. He opened the bag of Dunkin' Donut goodies he'd bought along the way and handed Natalie an iced latte. "Hey, you up for a latte?" Natalie grinned. "I thought you hated Dunkin' Donuts." With glowing cheeks, she claimed the drink in her hand and popped a straw through the lid. "Whew, that was definitely the cold zap I needed in this heat." Joseph laughed. "I knew you wanted refreshment after getting yourself done up. Your hair looks really nice, by the way." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Do you even know what I got done?" The beautician covered her mouth as Joseph nervously surveyed the ceiling. Deep conditioning?" Noting Natalie's sigh, he blurted, No, a wash and trim." Amused, the beautician winked. "He actually knows his stuff." She was a cinnamon-complected woman whose hair was gelled back in the permed bun. She flaunted 2 big gold-hooped earrings that nearly dropped all the way down to her shoulders and was otherwise laid in a black t-shirt with the salon's logo and spandex leggings. Natalie chimed in. "The fact he even cared to point out that my appearance changed is more than any guy would do. I told you he'd pass the best friend test." She acknowledged Joseph's puzzled expression. "Joseph, this is my best friend Monica. She's my beautician and, as you might have guessed, the owner of this hair salon." Joseph's jaw dropped. "Nice to meet you, Monica. Sorry I didn't bring you anything. I would have if I'd known." "Oh, don't sweat it. I have one of my girls grab a coffee from the bistro nearly every day. I can't for the life of me get why Natalie likes that sugary coffee down at Dunkin's." Joseph's eyes widened. It was like he'd met his twin from another mother. "Geez, I'm not the only one who feels the same way." Natalie rolled her eyes at her boyfriend and best friend. "Here comes the lecturing," she trailed off sourly. Monica rested a hand on her hip smugly. "Hey, I became name partner first." She glanced up at Joseph. "Get it? Because I got my name on the store?" Holding back her laughter, Natalie snapped. "That's not even how name partner even works in law." But Monica and Joseph had already doubled over at her pun. Natalie couldn't help herself from being tickled too. A snort escaped her mouth. Joseph laughed even louder at the sound. Monica gripped the ledge of her vanity as she gasped for air. "Whew, y'all have really given me a workout today," she quipped lightly. Once she'd respirated enough to stand up tall again, she said, "I'm glad to see you're a chill fella, Joseph. I think I'll trust you for now." "For now?" Joseph repeated teasingly. Monica gesticulated the "I'll keep my eyes on you" signal and started to remove Natalie's cape as she stood up. Joseph smiled as they linked hands, shadowing Monica to the cash register where Natalie was graced a generous best friend discount, 20% off. "Hey, your girl has student loans and rent to pay." Monica sucked her teeth as Joseph watched in bewilderment. He wasn't aghast per se, but the optics of the situation were so surreal he didn't know whether to be amused or flabbergasted. Monica tiptoed to his ear, whispering, "One thing you should know about Natalie is she keeps her coins close. Don't mess with my bestie's purse, as she says. Money don't grow on trees." Joseph curled his lips up so his giddiness wasn't too obvious. Seeing what her best friend was like, he couldn't wait to introduce Natalie to Sammy. There was just an easygoing nature that both of them seemed to gravitate towards. Plus, Joseph bet his best friend could pick up green flags just like Natalie's best friend did. Chapter 6. And then I told him, "You're installing the TV the wrong way, man. The screen is supposed to face us, not the wall." Joseph laughed. "When I tell you I was hollering, that was the most insane moving trip of my life." Natalie strained a smile. "Yeah, sounds wild." She pulled her hair back into a puff as she gazed down at the caviar that had just been placed on their table. A Parisian ambience gilded the restaurant with frescoes, tall windows, and elegant carpeting. Natalie's ankles brushed a bullion fringe attached to her chair's upholstery. Her body had been squirming and shuffling ever since they got to their reservation. Joseph's laughter died down. He frowned, groaning. "Is everything all right? You aren't yourself tonight." There was no fun in being the only one laughing. Natalie wasn't the type to stay mum when she was enjoying herself. Her bold demeanor was what drew Joseph to her, but bottling emotions in was a recipe at driving any two people apart. Joseph knew that from experience. Natalie took a deep exhale, sipping on her cocktail straw afterwards. The doctor called with bad news, she stated quietly. Her glossed lips trembled as she gazed down at her placemat, shivering even while next to the heat of the adjacent fireplace. Joseph pressed his lips tight. You can tell me anything, Natalie. Don't feel shy to tell me when something's up. I want to be here for you. His strong words wrapped around her like a comforter. She was whittled down from her aloof aura, assuming a gentler disposition as she met Joseph's gaze. His heart panged to see how her chocolate irises wavered under the chandelier light. Thank you, Joseph. But this one's a bit bigger than me. She picked up the napkin next to her bowl, wringing it around as if it offered better engagement than the parlance they dove into. For what was coming next, Joseph supposed, perhaps she'd have rather not utter the reason to her distress at all. It was almost like cementing it into reality, and the truth was damning enough on its own. Over the weekend, my mother got some more bad news. Jeez, her condition is getting worse. She burrowed her face into her napkin as sobs rocked her body. Hey, baby, I got you, Natalie, Joseph whispered. He extended an arm across the table to rub her shoulder. I know this is a lot on you. Take your time. Natalie shook her head, sniffles muffling her speech. The best chance someone with kidney failure has is to get a family member to donate their healthy organ. But I wasn't a match. I was the last one to test out of my siblings and hers. And the amount of people in America waiting for a donor is endless. Even if we pooled all of our estate's money into pulling some strings, I doubt we'd get more than an empty promise. Joseph clenched his jaw. At the end of the day, everything came down to money. Natalie's family was definitely well off, but their net worth was nothing in contrast to some of the multimillionaire families who put their wealth on the line to save a single family member. And besides that, so many people were waiting for their own family members to simply get a letter of acknowledgement. The waiting list was like playing the lotto. What were the chances of her mother finding a match, especially at her age? As bleak as her situation looked, Joseph didn't want to see Natalie's heart shatter into a million more pieces than it already had. She knew what was happening, and it clearly devastated her. Each dialysis treatment seemed to make her mom weaker. Everything came down to finding a donor. She didn't deserve to suffer through this alone. Natalie, I hope you can allow me to be here for you through all of this. I didn't know your mother's health had gotten this serious. He sympathized with her. I didn't want to bring it up because this, Natalie wagged her finger between her and Joseph, this is what helps me cope. I told you I got it. Please don't forget that. Natalie smiled sadly. Overwhelmed with gratitude and sorrow, she wailed with tears. This whole situation has been awful for me emotionally. I'd do anything to help my mom. If I could just have been a damn match. She paused for a moment to blow her nose. It hurts so bad to find out that I can't give of myself to save her. Joseph exhaled. I wish there was something I could do for your family. Anything, because it hurts me to see you like this. I want to see you happy, smiling and joking around like the fun-hearted Natalie I know. To see you get dragged down into something like this, life truly isn't fair. I'm starting to realize that. With a weak chuckle, she added. But I'm starting to realize my situation could be worse. At least I'm getting time to spend with my mom. And she's still fighting with the strong spirit she has. Maybe, just maybe, there's hope for things to turn around. Joseph grinned. Let's pray for it. Hope glimmered in the couple's eyes as they finished up the remnants of their cool dishes. The heavy air lulled their movements in fervency, but they were visibly happier than they could have ever been separate. Their presence lightened one another like a bulb being plugged into its outlet. Joseph would spend all day learning about Natalie's backstory if it meant he could hear her beautiful voice. and lapse a whole century by her side if it meant he'd never see the tearful face she showed that evening. Was he getting ahead of himself again? He hoped not. His passion for Natalie was palpable, but he knew it'd be unwise to stumble into the same trap he'd fallen into with Shannon. Shannon, a woman he'd forgotten about for so long. It felt alien to recall how heartbroken he was over her just 2 months ago. Natalie is different, he assured himself as they left the restaurant. They twisted down the bend that led to his apartment. For today at least, he'd make sure Natalie knew she wasn't alone. "Stop, you know I'm ticklish," Natalie giggled. Joseph smirked while rolling closer to her on his bed. He snuck his hand under her cami and grappled her by her waist. She kicked her leg back in retaliation. Alas, her efforts were no match against his masculine, chiseled body. Joseph powered his short stint in judo training into getting Natalie pressed down by her wrist. Then he grappled her by her waist. "Gotcha," he smirked in his morning rasp. He lowered down for a kiss, which was warmly welcomed. Natalie ran her fingers over Joseph's muscles. She resigned to savoring the soft sensation of Joseph's lips before they escalated to anything more risque. The mellow rays of dusk shone directly into their faces. Joseph could have never imagined it to be possible, but Natalie looked even more beautiful when bare. Her cheeks were speckled with the slightest bit of graininess. Up close, he could see she had her own perfect yet imperfect blemishes that traveled across her skin. He saw those quirks in the same way he regarded the way her waist dipped into a perfect hourglass, which was on full display as she wore nothing but spaghetti straps and high-cut shorts into his bed. "Wow, she is stunning, even when she's in PJs," he thought to himself lovingly. Slowly, Natalie pulled away from Joseph's lips. Their tongues untangled from one another as Natalie stared intensely into Joseph's eyes. Her dark irises whipped him into a pulse-soaring heat. What was she thinking? Did she want him to make a move? It was likely not past 7 a.m., and Joseph was already thrilled for a deeper rouse of his desires. Natalie, on the other hand, was not so quick to entertain his lust. She tossed over to the other side of the bed. Her chest swelled and ebbed softly as she took in the crystal flush mount above them. Joseph gazed lovingly at her figure. He didn't want to come across as clingy, but it always seemed to him that she was wholly unfazed in the heat of their lust. Sometimes he wondered if he was hooked on an image of her and not a passion she genuinely felt. He parted his mouth to ask, "Are we a couple?" If she didn't reciprocate the same level of desire for him, he didn't want to push what was not destined to be. Still, it had hurt for him to learn after all this time she was only seeking a quick fling. Natalie smirked, turning to face him directly. "Well, we are together." She took Joseph's palm from his side and began tracing a picture in it. He soon realized she was drawing a heart. "Together?" he repeated airily. Natalie laughed. "Yes, together." "So it's official?" Joseph wanted the confirmation to ring through his ears as many times as possible. She was his, he was hers, and they didn't have to hold themselves back anymore. Natalie grinned even wider in response. Joseph joked, "So I passed the best friend test?" Rolling her eyes jokingly, she slapped his shoulder and sat upright. "Geez, I wish I could stay here longer. I have a law class this morning that I have to be on time for." Joseph shrugged. "No biggie. I'm glad you took the time to come here in the bright AM. After your class finishes up, I was thinking maybe you could come with me to this event tonight." Clef Note was opening up for a major artist thanks to a recording of their Memphis show that had gone viral. Sorry, but I have a family dinner tonight. I really do cherish the time we get to squish into our schedules, but this is one I can't." Joseph waved his hands reassuringly. "Girl, it's okay. Family comes first. Say hi to your mom and whole man for me, all right?" He chuckled. Natalie smiled and smooched his lips. Chapter 7. Joseph bobbed his head to the percussion of Clef Note's newest single, Mamacita. The crowd loved their music. He'd gleaned that even the people who milled in with the banners for other performers were jumping along to the band's chorus. The grin of a proud mentor lifted his cheeks as he strolled out of the auditorium. One of the band members gave him a shout out just before he slipped out of the crowd. "Give it up for Joseph!" David, the drummer, yelled while jutting his fingers at Joseph in the audience. Joseph spluttered thank yous as he withstood the rush of fans swarming for his autograph. "Hey, sorry guys," he apologized as he staggered out of the exit doors. Adrenaline had clouded his mind so greatly he couldn't recall how leaving the concert turned into a literal obstacle course. He still felt hands tugging at his shirt as he scoped for an exit. "There," he breathed with relief. Glancing behind him, he broke for a dash through a narrow corridor that split into two pathways. He turned into the hallway that led to the furthest end of the building, then stopped once he found a long couch at an indoor cafe. The bar was empty, save for one woman and a barista. Joseph took the biggest inhale imaginable once his body touched the seat. "Damn, that should have qualified me for the Olympic 200-meter sprint," he muttered. He wiped the sleeve of his blazer across his forehead. Now that he couldn't return to the concert, he was left to idle at the outskirts of the auditorium for as long as it was open. Just as he hoisted his wrist to look at the time, a woman called his name. "Joseph?" She spoke unsurely, or at least that's what Joseph thought her reluctance came from. He didn't expect for his eyes to meet the last woman he wanted to see after what had happened 3 months ago. "Shannon?" Joseph stuttered. His throat choked up. Shannon still looked exactly the same as she did on the night they broke up. Her hair was straightened, curtaining the soft blades of her shoulders. Her button nose sloped like she'd been painted by one of those Renaissance artists who drew cherubs and angels. Her eyes were doughish and mesmerizing, so chocolate he could gaze into them forever. No, he couldn't. He couldn't let himself be lost in what never and would never belong to him. Her long eyelashes fluttered for some other arcane purpose. Her lips quirked up for dreams bigger than being tied down to their long-time relationship. She called it quits. They were over. He needed to stop pining for more. Standing next to Shannon was her best friend, Rachel. Joseph didn't even realize she was there. "Well, I'll let you two be," Rachel whispered as she walked off. Shannon clutched her purse close to her chest. Her body shivered as if she wasn't clothed in a thick turtleneck and over-the-knee boots. "Hey, it's been a while since we saw each other." She stated the obvious. Joseph was desperate to say something petty and leave, but her attention was irresistible. If anything, he wanted to give her a reason to stay. "Yeah, it has been. Life can get pretty busy when you're in Houston." Joseph wanted to smack himself for that response. What did being in Houston have to do with anything? He must have been the driest talker in existence. Thankfully, Shannon was just as awkward as he was. She stood in silence for a moment, flitting her eyes across the cafe in search for something to conversate about. Her eyes lingered on the argyle upholstery they'd custom fit for the chairs. "This place is pretty sick. Reminds me of the boutique furniture stores we used to browse when we were looking for an apartment." Joseph strained a smile. "When I was looking for an apartment, you made a gazillion excuses for why you couldn't move in." He gulped nervously as silence whelmed them again. He hated to admit it, but it didn't relieve him to see Shannon being put on the spot like this. He wanted her to know how hurt he was after she dumped him like the relationship meant little to her. But at the same time, he wanted them both to be happy again. And he could sense something was up with her. Her usual confident demeanor had dwindled to a fidgety, restless disposition. Do you think we could walk for a bit?" she asked meekly. Joseph regarded her with a hard face. The door was right behind him. He could leave right now and put his ex-romance in the grave for good. But why should he hate her? They didn't need to be strangers. There was no need to become enemies. And there was a chance for closure. "Okay," he said lowly. They strolled together at a close distance, ordering 2 drinks from the cafe. Joseph went with the Earl Grey tea while Shannon bought a fruit smoothie. The sounds of her slurping from her straw were all that sifted between them for a few moments. So, how's your music management going? Shannon piped up. The hall skylights brightened the contour of her face. Beside her, she and Joseph were partitioned from the outdoors through a framed row of floor-to-ceiling windows. They looked out to an empty courtyard with a garden and some chairs. Joseph shrugged. Clef Note's song Troublesome has been getting some good traction. You'd probably remember us going over one of their demos in the recording booth. Turns out that song actually has some real potential. Shannon gasped, her eyes having lit up. They got a hit? No way. Joseph smiled. They're no Billboard #1, but they managed to crack the top 100. Shannon's brown eyes twinkled as they twisted into her stairwell. It sounds like you're really figuring out your life, huh? I've been pretty directionless nowadays. Her voice lulled to muteness. Do you think about what could have been sometimes? Joseph pursed his lips. Of course, I do. Our breakup was devastating, but I know you were ready to move on, and I can never force someone I care about to do something that's not in their heart. I just wanted you to be happy. Shannon chimed in. I really wanted it to work. We both did, clearly, but we just grew apart. They descended down the stairs in silence, admiring the twilit view that cascaded through the receding windows. The atmosphere had grown tranquil. It appeared Joseph had misinterpreted the tension between them. They were rattled by the doubts they'd pent up inside of them, but neither of them had wandered off without attachment. Seeing each other awoke what they'd abandoned. The emotions, the memories, the I love yous, all the special entitlements they'd lost when they decided they needed to split. Joseph opened the hallway door for Shannon as she proceeded to sit at a couch not too far from the lobby. She plopped her purse on her lap, riveting on Joseph in thought. You know, I kinda lied when I said I've been directionless, I think. Shannon started. Her voice faltered like she was churning a stream of thoughts, not really lingering on what she said or why it escaped her lips. Joseph's chest squeezed. Really? In what way? His emotions confused him. On one hand, he was gleeful to spring forward with his life, snuggling up to Natalie while relishing the upshoot of his career in music. He was becoming a better man than he ever was with Shannon, and yet he lingered on the fact that she might have grown too. She might have always been ahead of him. There was no lingering draw to him, no nothing. He was grasping at an illusion. Shannon bit her lip. I've been thinking a lot about our relationship since we broke up, and I've started to realize that I might have jumped too immaturely to make a rushed choice. She patted the space next to her on the couch. Would you mind sitting next to me for this? I feel awkward when you're standing over me like that. Joseph glanced at the couch, conflicted. Shannon knew what her touch did to him, and he feared that if he set his butt down on those cushions, he'd never be able to get up and storm for the exit if he needed to. If only his will was as strong as his curiosity. Against all rationality, he trotted up to the sofa, rotated, and sat inches apart from Shannon. Her lavender scent billowed like oxygen to his nostrils. She perched her hands on the ledge of the sofa, wrapping her fingers around the cushions tightly. I've known for weeks. I shattered your world when we broke up. And honestly, I shattered myself too. I thought I'd become a bigger person when I went off by myself, but after all this time alone, I realized that losing you meant I also strayed away from me. Joseph's gaze were severe. You're saying I was a part of you? He lowered his volume to a whisper. You were a part of me, too. Shannon smiled sadly. If only that all made sense to me earlier. But maybe this is my immaturity speaking. But I don't believe mistakes have to end in permanent punishment like this. She suddenly enveloped Joseph's hand in hers. I'm willing to give us another try for the sake of love. There it was. What Joseph had been waiting for all along. He was expecting to be rocked with a wave of euphoria, possibly even launched to the moon screaming, "I told you so." But there was no boost of pride. There was no rejoicing. He clammed up, wanting to shut away the emotions that were boiling inside of him. He didn't like this. He didn't want to unearth what threatened to rise to the surface. Joseph slithered his hand out of her clasp. Maybe us not being together is the best thing for both of us. He fought to maintain his tone as steadily as he could. Shannon argued, "It could be, but I don't want to have any regrets." Something of her words rustled Joseph. "How come I haven't met your parents?" he snapped. Shannon barely flinched. "I just wanted to make sure you're the right one." Joseph was riled with the urge to frown. The right one? Really? That was her cop-out? It was like she was reading off a rehearsed script. So robotic, so trite, so shallow. After all this time and you're not sure? It's been 3 years. He was grateful for the fact that Clef Note's music could still be heard rumbling from the auditorium. Otherwise, people passing by would see him flipping out like a madman. Even Shannon was taken aback by his temper. He wasn't the type to get caught up in his emotions. He'd smooth out crimps with calmness and reason. He wanted to say sorry. Instead, he crossed his arms. He was battling with the same song and dance, and Shannon had the audacity to serenade him with her gentle voice, tempt him with her luscious lips, and clench his heart with her sad eyes. She lurched for his hand again. "Like I said, I'm willing to give our love another chance." She paused as if waiting to see if Joseph would pull away. He didn't. So she leaned on his shoulder, rubbing her hand up his arm in silence. He didn't move. They both sat on the sofa quietly, the faint melody of Clef Note's closing song, Troublesome, humming in the background. Chapter 8. Home sweet home. Joseph smiled. He lumbered up the steps to his parents' porch. Ma's potted plants were by the windowsill like always, a mature sunflower having bloomed all the way to Joseph's chest. He laughed lightly as his eyes flew back to the lawn, where he spent most of his summer mornings plowing through with the mower. He could still feel the sting of his father's palm from when he fumbled the "my stomach isn't feeling well" excuse, only to be caught rummaging through the kitchen later for some Fruit Loops. "Yeah, I really don't miss my childhood all that much," Joseph snickered as the nostalgia washed off of him. Upon an indulgent sniff, however, there was one thing he wished he could have gotten more of: his mother's famous praline pecan candy. Well, not quite famous past the intersection of their small road, where Joseph could rely on families to buy a batch every weekend for $5 a pop, but famous enough for Joseph. He didn't know what magic God had imbued his mother's hands with, but Joseph had never been able to replicate her baking skills in his own kitchen. She just knew how to sprinkle the right ingredients and measurements. His stomach growled as the aroma intensified in the front door. The frosted transom was wreathed with the out-of-season Thanksgiving baubles. The house itself was a tower of rose-colored bricks, its roof being a Harley burgundy that withstood squirrel attacks and horrible hurricanes. "When I get rich, I'll get you guys a new house in the suburbs," Joseph pledged as he raised his hand to ring the doorbell. His parents had done a lot to get them into a space where they could grow and nurture their gifts and abilities. His dream was to repay them for their sacrifices so that they can enjoy retirement in peace too. When he jabbed the ornamented doorbell, the door swung open immediately. Joseph contorted his face in confusion. Was Ma spying on him from her rocking chair? But it wasn't Ma's face he saw first. He gaped back at his brown-skinned mini-me, Jared, Joseph's younger brother by 3 years, as he glanced up at him with a shocked expression. "Hey, Joe, what you doing around here?" He was holding a sleek briefcase in one hand. Joseph proudly ran his eyes up and down his brother. Years ago, he would have never guessed he'd grow up into the man he was today. Wearing a business suit and talking about leveraging bonds like it was his native tongue, he embraced Jared in a quick hug. "Man, it's good to see you. I've been meaning to call you." Jared sighed. "It's all good, brother. We were just talking yesterday about how it's been a hot minute since we've all came over at the same time. Ma made a fresh batch of candy. You'll love them." Joseph smiled. All right, I'll catch you later. His brother gave a thumbs up as he scurried to the foreign vehicle parked across the street. Okay, I see you with the black on black whip. Looking good, little brother, Joseph muttered, eyeing the luxury car that was parked on the street. Once the car had faded into the distance, Joseph welcomed himself into his parents' home. He was immediately greeted by the wall of picture frames that were hung in the living room. His mother, donning her signature pearl necklace and side-bang bob, was smiling next to the family patriarch, Elliot Baker. It was almost eerie how similar his parents looked to when they took this photo. Maybe it was because he'd always been their little boy, but he could have sworn they hadn't aged a day since posing at the gazebo for their 40th birthday. They were now approaching 60. He removed his coat and hung it on one of the hooks. He could still smell the praline candy, and oh, were they wonderful. He'd probably sneak a couple into a Ziploc bag before he headed back to his apartment. After strolling past the TV, he entered the dining room that was tucked between the living room and the open kitchen. The only partition in the kitchen was the island area that sat directly in the middle, and unlike the dining area, the kitchen boasted yellow walls and pale appliances. The Bakers had decorated the rest of the house with fancy wallpaper that they made sure stayed in tip-top condition. He spotted his mother finishing a plate of oats at the dinner table. She looked up and smiled at Joseph once she saw him. "We were just talking about you," his mother said in her raspy voice. "I didn't expect God to bring you here so quickly." Joseph bent to kiss her on her cheek. "You always mention how powerful he is. Can I take a seat?" He sat down at his mother's nod. The dining table had 8 seats. There were never that many members in the family, nor had Joseph's parents ever planned for there to be. They just liked the idea of having a packed room. Plus, Bernice, Joseph's mother, often invited her friends over from church on the weekends. He settled down in the chair opposite to her. A fruit bowl stood between the two of them. "Now, my son, what's on your mind?" Bernice was Joseph's go-to person for advice. Whenever he needed to have a major life decision affirmed, like pursuing music full-time, or to hear whether he was going down the right path, she'd be the one to listen to him spilling his heart out and speak the truth. His dad wasn't a bad fellow either, just super old school, so it was hard to get a word in without him interrupting halfway through his explanation. Joseph could see him finishing up some backyard work behind his mom. "I met this girl named Natalie. She's a beautiful young lady who's also from Houston." Joseph unlocked his phone and showed his mother a picture of Natalie. His mother placed a hand on her heart, smiling. "My, she is a beauty." She took a sip from her tea as he continued. "And she's not just beautiful. She's funny, intelligent, working to be a lawyer. I think I found my wife." Bernice scrunched her nose in confusion. "Wife? I thought you was with somebody." Joseph dropped his gaze to the table. "That one's over." A slight pause waited into his speech. "I wanted to know what you think I should do." "I didn't realize you was talking about getting married right now, Joseph. That's a little fast, I think." Joseph started. "I know it sounds crazy, but I really feel a lot for this woman. You've got to understand me, Ma." Through the back door windows, he could see his father walk into the patio to disassemble his equipment. He reciprocated Joseph's wave. Bernice sat in contemplation. Finally, she sighed. "At the end of the day, I raised you to follow your heart. So, if you feel like this is the right one for you, you'll have my blessings." Joseph beamed. "Thank you, Ma." The back door whined as it thrusted open. "All right now, son," his dad began. "Elliot, be quiet," Bernice cut him off. Joseph covered his laugh with a hand. "It's good to be back home," he mused happily. Joseph tapped his foot on Natalie's doorstep. His hand shook at his back. "You've known her for 3 months now," he reminded himself repeatedly. It wasn't like he swanked up to the door of some random stranger. This was the Miss Smith he'd been spending long nights with, chatting into the AM, the one whose laughs lifted his soul and touch raced his heart. A barrage of footsteps neared the door. Joseph stiffened. He snuck a quick glance at his phone camera. His fade was fresh, check. There were no collard greens stuck between his teeth? Check. He combed his fingers through his low buzzed hair quickly as the door unlocked. Natalie cracked the door slightly ajar. Her jaw dropped as she gave Joseph a lengthy once-over. Whoa, are you here to sweep me away in Cinderella's carriage? Joseph's suit and tie seemed to have quite the effect on her. His impressive physique helped model any rim of clothes well, but this wasn't any ordinary pair of blazer and pants pulled off the rack. Natalie could glean the fine stitches of his suit material from where she stood. And then there was his cologne, which had been spiced up with an extra piquant musk. She couldn't discern the notes she was picking up. Was it timberwood? Spearmint? As she teetered through the doorway for a hint, she glimpsed the bouquet of flowers behind him. These are for you, Joseph grinned. He outstretched the beautiful arrangement of irises and buttercups. I hope you like them. Oh, Joseph. Tears glazing her eyes, Natalie snatched the bouquet of flowers and pressed them to her chest. She moaned at its ambrosial scent. Amused, Joseph asked, Mind if I come in? Natalie bobbed her head enthusiastically. Of course. I'll put this in a vase. Natalie held the door open for Joseph so he could come inside her apartment. The place was comfortably modest. Obviously rented by someone who was watching their budget for school expenses, but cozy nonetheless. Small portraits of her family and their excursions were displayed next to a TV. She had a beanbag for a couch and a table that looked as if it was plucked from the outdoor section of a clearance sale. I tried to decorate this using as much of my own money as possible, Natalie informed while inserting her new flowers into a glass of water. I should have bought a vase when I was moving, too. Guess I never thought I'd be building a deep connection with someone else in the near future. Joseph smirked. I could have never saw it coming either. He brought a chair from the self-proclaimed dining table to the side of Natalie's beanbag. She plopped down beside him when she finished attending to the flowers. I'm really happy to see you again. The family dinner went really well. I got to see my little brother, and my dad made an effort not to be a total grump. In the words of Ice Cube, today was a good day. Natalie smiled. I'm glad you enjoyed your time with your family. I bet y'all ate some really good food. Natalie laughed as she poked Joseph in his stomach. With a smile plastered across her face, Natalie seeped downwards in her beanbag. She crossed one leg over the other, inquiring, How was last night? Was the event fun? Joseph returned a thin smile. It was good. All of a sudden, his sunny disposition dulled to a wall of ambiguity. Natalie wasn't sure what she did to dampen the mood. Did Clefno perform well? Met any zealous fangirls while you were there? Didn't see anyone special, but Clefno definitely gave a good show. Natalie contorted her face. She couldn't understand why he was tense about an event he invited her to a day earlier. Was Clefno the no-go for their conversation from now on? Just as she parted her lips to pry further, Natalie's doorbell rung. Huh? I'm not expecting anyone. Natalie trailed off, waiting to see if the knocking would stop. Whoever was at the door was persistent, and Natalie couldn't resist the mysterious guest. She strolled to the door. A delivery guy pushed forward an extremely large and rectangular-shaped box. For you, Miss Smith, he said while scrawling something onto a notepad. Can you please sign this delivery? Natalie was utterly lost as to what was unfolding in front of her. Yeah, sure, she stammered while signing her name in blue ink. The delivery guy nodded and hastened for the elevators. Confused, Natalie shook her head as she turned toward Joseph. I got this strange package, she mumbled as Joseph rubbernecked at her. He peered over her shoulder with his eyes squinted tightly. Open it, he urged her. She raised an eyebrow at him, but obliged. Her fingers ripped through the tape that ran across the edges of the cardboard box. She could feel a heavy object inside of the package, but it was tightly enclosed, so it must have taken up the entirety of the flat box. Her mind scrambled to guess what it could be. A large TV screen? The worst part about her cluelessness was that Joseph clearly reveled in it. He had something to do with this package, but how? It'd be an understatement to say Natalie's heart rocketed to the sky when she found out how. She first saw the back of a picture, which had been signed with a signature she couldn't recognize. She already knew this was some type of painting or photograph, but the oversized composition had her scratching her head. "Come on, keep going," Joseph teased her as she flipped the delivery onto his back. And that's when she sprung into the air. "The painting from the gallery," Natalie squealed. She kicked her legs into the air, hopping like a bunny. "I can't believe it. How did you get this?" Joseph slowly walked up to her, wrapping his hands around her waist. Natalie blushed under his tender grasp. "I met you and fell in love with you on top of a mountain. There, I realized what a beautiful soul you were, wandering the world. Destiny brought us back together that same night. Every day since we've met, Natalie, you've inspired me. You uplift me and you give my days meaning. I want to thank you for changing me and teaching me how to truly love. I want to welcome 1,000,000,000, no, an infinity more days standing by your side." He knelt to the floor, taking a small box from his hind pocket. He popped it open. Inside was a diamond ring. "Natalie, will you marry me?" Natalie clamped her hands together bashfully. "Yes, I will." She jumped into Joseph's arms when he got up from the floor, allowing him to slide the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. This whole moment was perfect. The flowers, the art, them being together. Tears clouded her vision as she admired her shiny ring. "We can fly to Vegas and get married. It'll be the two of us and our best friends," Joseph whispered into her ears. The husk in his low voice flooded her heart. "Let's just be spontaneous and live life." "When will we go?" she asked. "Tomorrow," Joseph responded, tightening his embrace. Natalie knit her eyebrows. "I don't know if I can pack up so soon. With my mother's health condition, I'm the one who takes her to her dialysis." Joseph released her from their hug, cupping her cheeks in his palm. "Natalie, I don't want to rush you when you have a lot on your plate. All I want for us is to take risk for our love and to live on purpose. I want our love engraved in paper and to have it cemented in the mountains. I want to do everything with you, baby." Natalie felt her heart squeeze. She wanted to do everything with him too, but she struggled with the ideal of leaving her mother's side for an unplanned out-of-town wedding. Chapter 9. "I never knew business class could be so great," Sammy moaned as he leaned back in his recliner. Lounging next to one of the plane's windows, he gulped a generous sip of his cocktail. His face was lightened by the sun that poured in from the sky. Sitting to his left, Joseph regarded his friend with disapproval. "We're sharing the cabin with strangers too, you know. Better not be making all those vocal effects when we're fleecing off a discounted package." The quartet was lucky to get the perfect number of tickets for their flight because of a mass cancellation by VIP passengers. The tickets didn't come completely for free. Joseph believed in miracles, but that would have been an utter fantasy. They instead were offered business class packages for half the price as long as they bought in bulk. Joseph shouldered all their expenses so the flight could be booked swiftly. Sammy waggled his eyebrows. "Oh yeah, I forgot I should be saving that for y'all to savor during your honeymoon." Joseph nearly choked on his drink as he and Monica burst into laughter. Behind him, Natalie patted Joseph's shoulder. "It's okay. At least everyone's having fun," she reassured. Everyone except them. When he suspected Sammy and Monica would share a lot of traits, he didn't anticipate they'd team up together and making him and Natalie as flustered about their relationship as possible. They didn't hold back for a second with their innuendos and sensual quips. "You're right," Joseph sighed. He couldn't have wished for any other friend to accompany him on this trip regardless. On the bright side, he'd become just as immune as Natalie to these risque teases. Joseph's phone started ringing in his pocket. He glanced at the caller ID, Shannon. Natalie was right behind his shoulder. He flung the phone back down to his waist and shoved it into his pocket. That was not the name he needed to be seeing right now. "You gonna answer that?" Sammy questioned absently. He was busy sampling pinky-sized treats from their confectionery platter. Joseph snagged a handful and stuffed them into his mouth. "Nope," he mumbled through food. Nothing detracted from a conversation like having to say, "Huh?" multiple times to just guess what someone was trying to say. Just a scam caller. He wasn't totally lying. The call eventually went to his voicemail. Good, Joseph thought. He was going to focus on his up-and-coming wedding during this plane ride. Joseph and Natalie shrieked as Sammy jumped from the hotel's 15 feet tall diving board. He plunged butt first into the pool, sending a tsunami-like wave over their spluttering bodies. Yo, what the heck? Monica shouted from her lounge chair. She thought she'd be safe from Sammy's antics while sunbathing next to the very attentive pool boy. Alas, a few feet distance was no match for Sammy's audacity. He'd gotten too much alcohol in him to say no to a wild spectacle. Playful, he smirked. Why don't y'all come in? It's nice and cool in here. He splashed water at Joseph in some attempt of advertising the fun of being in the water. Monica shook her head adamantly. I think I'll stay with Carlos over here. Carlos, you said there's a girl who'll be on duty with you in 5 minutes, right? She aired her gaze at the disheveled, wavy hair next to her. He wore a chain and red shorts with white stripes at the sides. His flip-flops were also in the standard lifeguard scarlet. His body, however, was chiseled like a Grecian god. It was no wonder Monica kept asking him to fix the legs of her chair. Carlos nodded. Yes, she'll be here soon. Natalie couldn't withhold her laughter in the sight. He, too, had a playful glint in his eyes. Perhaps she and Joseph weren't the only ones who'd be smothered against each other when the straw torches went off. Sammy's eyes lit up at the revelation. A girl is coming. He waited for the pool ladder and jumped to his feet. Carlos, if this woman looks even half as good as you, I think I found my love in Vegas. The whole crew laughed as Sammy wrapped himself in a towel and sprinted for the hotel suite. Hopefully he'll be able to find a designer outfit that looks believable for him to wear out here, Natalie whispered to Joseph. He snickered under his breath, chiming in. Don't worry. If this one doesn't work out, he'll move on to the receptionist. Natalie roared along with him as they swam to the opposite side of the pool. With Natalie immersed in her own burgeoning romance, they had pressing matters to broach. Palm trees canopied their vision as they propped themselves by the ledge of the pool. Huge coconuts swayed under each leafy tree. Hammocks were also fixed between some trunks, others garlanded with lights and other sorts of decorations. Joseph tipped himself backwards as he admired the evening sky through the thick shade above. I wonder what venue we should pick, Natalie muttered as she kicked her feet in the pool. Joseph wrapped an arm around her waist, tugging her closer. She nuzzled into his hard pecs. Any venue would be amazing as long as I'm with you, he quipped, kissing her on her forehead. But I found a nice chapel that I think will be fun. Natalie raised an eyebrow. Really? Are you keeping it as a surprise? Or should I know whether this will be at some makeshift altar in the desert? Joseph chuckled. Don't worry. There won't be any shady bookings while we're here. I have a feeling you'll enjoy where we're going. Natalie pressed closer to his body. I love you, Joseph. Love you too, Natalie. He rubbed her head as they both floated silently, watching the orange sky recede to a star-speckled navy. Natalie lifted the train of her ivory wedding dress. The sweeping gown was sewn lace, chiffon, and silk, the first of which embellished her V-line bodice and the rest woven into the floor-length cape and skirt. She donned a corsage to match Joseph's rose boutonniere. Natalie grinned as she ascended the steps to Joseph in the gazebo. He fiddled with his bow tie nervously, astonished by the beautiful bride that stepped to his height. He looked into the same pair of eyes that had raced his pulse since he first met her, but there was a different blaze that rushed him in this moment. It was the excitement of knowing they'd tie their vows permanently. Their love would be inscribed for the world to see, and this beautiful memory would be pictured in photographs they could reflect on forever. Her natural updo bounced as she reached his place on the gazebo. I didn't realize that an Elvis wedding chapel would mean the officiator is an Elvis Presley impersonator, she whispered. Even in this serious moment, Joseph could barely stifle his laughter. What better way is there to set a grand day than inviting Elvis, he joked. Natalie smiled as she rested her hands in his palms. How much did this cost? She laughed. Joseph shrugged with a lopsided smile. $300. He and Natalie giggled like school children who relished their first kiss as the Elvis impersonator recited the lines. They were soon led into their vows. Our path, our love, Our journey, both chanted in synchronicity. The harmony in their voices pulled Joseph's grin even wider. The view was breathtaking. He couldn't believe he was here with this woman, sealing his eternal love in a wedding they'd planned on a whim. There wasn't anything that screamed serious love to him like a woman who was ready to take a chance for the fire they so obviously ignited between each other. "Joseph Baker, do you take Natalie Smith's hand in marriage?" the officiator asked. "I do," Joseph smiled. He was practically buzzing in his shoes. Was there any question how badly he wanted to be with this woman? Fake Elvis then posed to Natalie. "Natalie Smith, do you take Joseph Baker's hand in marriage?" "I do," she beamed. "You may kiss the bride." Sammy and Monica hooted as they watched their friends embrace in a passionate kiss. Natalie jumped into Joseph's arms as she locked tongues with him, savoring every bit of love she could sample in celebration of their communion. They withdrew from each other's lips with hope in their eyes. This was a good change. The best kind of change they could ask for. Standing in front of Natalie, Joseph felt like a king next to his queen. No, she was far more gorgeous than that, and it wasn't the floral arch or fancy decorations that was making it so. It was being right in his arms while they professed the strongest commitment known to man, the affection seeping through every pore that heated their skin. "Ready?" Joseph asked Natalie playfully. He rotated and stuck out an arm for her to loop into. "Ready," she replied eagerly. Arm in arm, she skipped down the altar with her husband. She didn't forget to throw her bouquet, launching it into the air as Monica hurtled to clasp it in her palms. "Best wedding ever," she squealed while holding it to her chest. Natalie and Joseph laughed as they skipped down the crimson rug and past the pews that lined the chapel, eventually making it to the courtyard. Their evening was dazzled with intimate festivities. They parted ways with Sammy and Monica shortly after their wedding ceremony, letting them know they'd reconvene later at the hotel. For the time being, they just wanted to enjoy the city as a couple. Joseph made Natalie topple over and laughing with his mouth-stuffing talent. He was able to crown 15 chocolate-dipped strawberries from the fountain while mumbling "I love you" in the most serious tone he could assume. It was hard for Natalie to not crack when her husband bore puffy cheeks and seemed to be on the brink of asphyxiation. "Okay, stop. My belly is going to explode," she hollered between cackles. Joseph finally relented and emptied his mouth of the treats. They went on to watch a fire-eating show and played a few unlucky games at the casino. What's a trip to Vegas without gambling? Natalie reasoned as they fell into their 8th round of putting too many chips into a rigged game. Their night ended at the spacious suite of their hotel. The adjoining rooms belonged to Sammy and Monica, who were both divided into small spaces wherein they'd solely share a kitchen with Joseph and Natalie. In preparation for the night, Joseph knocked on the walls to see how thick the insulation was. Turned out, Sammy would have nothing to tease him about the next morning, though he did see him stumbling into his suite with what he guessed to be one of the women from the resort bar anyways. Joseph slowly unbuttoned his shirt when they got to the bedroom. He stared into Natalie's eyes with a severity she'd never seen before. "What?" she asked softly, her breath speeding up. He grabbed her cheek in his hand. In less than a second, he pulled Natalie onto his lips by the tresses of her hair. Her fancy updo spiraled into a disheveled mass as they got into a wild, passionate bout of kisses and touches. Kissing and gasping, the two fell onto the bed as she entwined her hands in his. With the passion that only a husband could have for his newlywed, he whispered in her ear, "Only if you're ready." Chapter 10. The click-clacks of a laptop keyboard reverberated through Natalie's apartment. She shifted her MacBook so that Joseph could get up from her lap. "There's a loft downtown that I'd like for us to take a look at," she muttered between tapping on rental ads. The unit she was eyeing flaunted a solarium and storage room, along with enough space for them to fit her paintings and other art collectibles in the loft. Joseph reacted less enthusiastically than she'd expected. "Downtown?" He laughed. "I'm credit challenged. I wouldn't even make my foot through the door to book a showing, let alone sign the lease." Natalie squirmed under his weight. She really did love the glamour of spaces orientated toward creatives. She was confident Joseph would have felt the same way as well. How cool would it be for them to skitter down the stairs during early mornings for breakfast before they squeezed into their storage to pull out equipment for an art project? Joseph could strum up a few songs while she was away at school, and she could foray into painting her own pieces if God would be so gracious as to bless her fingers once more. It had been years since she picked up a brush. A loft was the perfect place for them, but Joseph was not ready to open his heart to a grunge, open lifestyle. Natalie sighed and shut her laptop. Joseph looped his arms around her, noting her agitation. Hey, babe, if you want to check out those types of places, we can talk about it. We're married now. All of our decisions should keep both of our boundaries in mind. Natalie smiled. I guess I'm not used to much compromise. Sorry for seeming a bit sassy. Her head lolled onto his shoulders. Rubbing her hand over his chest, she purred. Speaking of marriage, we should make our announcements online, Joseph said. We should tell our families first. After all, how weird would it be for them to find out their children eloped and told a bunch of social media followers first? Natalie chuckled. The optics for that are pretty poor. Let me call my mom. Tossing her blanket off her thighs, Natalie got up from her beanbag while Joseph watched her from the floor. He shimmied up to her as she thumbed to her mother's number on her phone. Hey, Mom, she greeted when the line connected. Hello, my sweet dear. How are you and Joseph doing? Her mother, Michelle, sounded a lot frailer than she had the last time Joseph met her. He gulped down his observation as the conversation played through the speaker. Maybe it's just a morning rasp, he reasoned to himself. Guess what happened? Natalie asked. Before her mother could muster a response, she squealed, I got married! The excitement bled through Michelle's voice. I can't believe it. Congratulations, Natalie. Thank you, Mom. I was so happy to have done this. It was a big leap, I know it was, but I couldn't be happier to have taken this chance. Her mother chirped, I'm absolutely ecstatic for you and your new hubby, too. I knew he was a special one when y'all first met at the gas station. And hey, now that you've locked him down, tell him he still owes me my soda. Joseph and Natalie laughed with tears gathering in the corner of their eyes. Yeah, I'll let him know that, Mom. I'll talk to you later, okay? She ended the call with a burst of energy in her demeanor. Now it's your turn, she spoke to Joseph. He grabbed his phone from the coffee table and went to his text conversation with his mother. He typed a small but powerful word. Married. And hit send. Done, he told Natalie, who was peering over his shoulder. They both giggled at the curt nature of his reveal. Dang, I don't know what people are going to say on Facebook, Natalie confessed. She was already in the midst of typing up her announcement on her phone. Joseph sighed. Guess we'll have to find out. Hovering his finger above the post button, he said, on the countdown, 3, 2, 1, send. Their announcements were now live. Natalie rocked back and forth beside him as she waited for her first notification. She nearly jolted off her beanbag when the first comment flew in within nanoseconds. OMG, one of her classmates at law school wrote with the shocked emoji and heart eyes. Others swarmed into her comment section by the dozens, writing their well wishes and swooning over how beautiful she and Joseph looked in the wedding photo they posted. Joseph laughed. Wow. And here I was expecting it to be a slow trickle of likes. Now I feel like more of a celebrity than Clef Note. Natalie elbowed him playfully as she scrolled through more of the comments, reading them aloud with pride. She pointed out specific people she was close to in real life and glowed about their reactions. Natalie, I always knew you were the smart, go-getter woman who'd make big strides early in her life. I'm glad to see. Natalie was reading one of the comments under her post when her phone began to ring. At the same time, Joseph felt his phone vibrate. Ignore it, she remarked while going through more of the comments. She grinned as she jubilated over a comment from her law professor. I can't believe she actually checked out my post. Joseph rubbed her back as she pattered about more exciting reactions. While she was wrapped up in her euphoria, however, curiosity got the best of him. His eyes drifted to his phone screen, where he glimpsed the name of the person who was calling him. Shannon. A bitter sensation developed in his throat. His eyes remained glued to his phone until it turned to black. the call fading into the trenches of his voicemail box. "Are you checking the comments under your announcements too?" Natalie asked, feeling Joseph's gaze leave her back. He scrambled to find some sort of ruse, grinning as wide as he could force himself to. "Yeah," he lied. He raised his phone to peek at the comments under his post. Pretty much all of them were just as exalting as the ones under Natalie's page, some from friends he hadn't talked to in a while, and one from a woman he dreaded to see under his profile. "Shannon, congratulations. I'm happy for you." Joseph's grin momentarily fell. He was only snapped out of his daze when Natalie called. "Joseph." She eyed him concerningly. "Sorry. I was just thinking about something." He quickly plastered on his happy face again and cozied up to Natalie's shoulder, joining her in reading the comments under the wedding announcement. The next morning, Joseph was sweeping the floor of his apartment when he heard a knock at his door. "Probably those pyramid scheme folk," he muttered while gathering some scraps into his dustpan. He straightened from his crouching position when he heard a series of knocks again, this time louder. "Who in the hell?" His forehead creased as he crept toward the door. Checking to see if there was a silhouette through his window curtains, he looked through the peephole. An older, husky black man in a suit stood impatiently at his door. His hair was slightly salted and peppered, the grays matching his beard that was so plush it could have given Santa Claus a run for his money. Nonetheless, the man was coiffed. He was a gentleman with age, not any vagrant who'd be wandering for some spare change. Joseph thought, what business does he have with me? The only sort of confrontation he could see coming was from one of his artist ex-managers or a real estate developer soliciting his go-ahead to gentrify the building. Joseph was not the kind of guy to have random guests popping up at his doorsteps, especially not the ones who looked like they bathed in Armani. Wary, Joseph cracked the doors open a slit. The man immediately growled, "Joseph?" Joseph's heart skipped a beat. How did this man know his name? And why was he staring him down as if he pissed on his suit? Sweat beaded Joseph's temples. He didn't know whether to be assured or scared by the fact that the man bore familiarity to him. Somehow, it was like he resembled someone Joseph closely knew. Perhaps he would have been able to hazard a guess if his mind weren't whirling 1,000,000 miles per second. The man failed to heed Joseph's anxiety, or he plainly didn't care. "I'm Natalie's father," he flatly introduced himself, "Thomas Smith." Joseph's spirit soared through the ceiling. "Oh, Natalie's father. I've heard so much about you." So he wasn't about to be dumped into a suspicious lake in the prairie today. But he was about to get interrogated by his wife's father. With the number of girls he dated, Joseph could sense when there was an air of protectiveness shrouding a parent. Thomas's shoulders were all puffed up, and despite his significant age, he glared at Joseph like he could thump him into the floor if Joseph made one wrong move. This old man feared nothing. It was almost chilling. "Wow, I've barely heard anything about you," Thomas shot gruffly. "Mr. Baker, I am aware that not every young boy receives the dignity of being taught by a man to practice respect. But I do think that even the less refined of us can agree it's terrible to wed a woman without her father's blessings." Joseph staggered backwards, shocked. "Sir, first I must inform you that I was raised in a well-mannered household, and I do have a good idea what respect means. But you storming up to my door to talk down on me and my family ain't the way to go about respecting others." He was fine with Natalie's father being disgruntled towards him. The wedding was a hasty agreement, and he wished for nothing less than to make Natalie's parents feel as if they were iced out from a special moment in her life. The problem was Thomas's behavior. Just a few seconds of talking to him reminded Joseph of why exactly he was an infamous figure in Natalie's stories. He had no consideration for the sensibilities of anyone but himself, yet he wanted to lecture about tact and upbringings? "Oh, please, what are you doing with your life? Is this the type of home you plan to pay for my daughter? A dingy little shoebox in the middle of Trouble Street where I just saw a homeless man syringing his 1,000th high?" Thomas snarled. Joseph laughed bitterly. "You did not see a homeless man do any of that. If you thought this was a place so suspect, you wouldn't be sticking your nose up in here trying to find trouble. I ain't looking for no trouble, clueless boy. I'm defending my daughter's dignity, something you never be able to do. Thomas looked Joseph up and down with disgust. He was not sold on the marriage. Right as Joseph opened his mouth for a comeback, his phone rang. It's your daughter, Joseph snarked as he answered the call. Hello, honey. He emphasized the sugarness in his speech just so he could delightfully witness Thomas gag on their affection. Hey, baby, just wanted to check in with you, Natalie said. She was completely oblivious to the fact her father had besieged Joseph's residence. Well, do I have a lot to tell you, sweetheart? Joseph snickered while eyeing her father. Apparently, your dad, Thomas Smith, is at my door. Oh, and you're on speakerphone. Natalie gasped. Dad? What are you doing at Joseph's apartment? Joseph turned the phone volume up. I can't believe this. What are you doing? Thomas scoffed. It's called being a responsible father. I'm here to tell this foolish boy he cannot disturb my family with his inbred ways. What the heck are you talking about? Dad, this is my life, my husband. You have no right to come up on this place like that, Natalie shouted. Her father was not having it. Natalie, this is not how your life was supposed to go. That's your problem. You think you can control everyone's life around you. You'd probably arrange a marriage for me if you could. In a low voice, Thomas retorted, I probably would have done a better job. Joseph butted in. Hey, you realize I'm right here. Thomas hissed something under his breath. Then he swatted away Joseph's phone, crowing, I expect to see you both at dinner tonight. He left Joseph in a fog of fury, confusion, and guilt. Joseph adjusted his tie while eyeing himself through the entrance window. When he finished, Natalie cocooned her hands in his. Everything will be all right, she crooned to him with a smile. He nodded stiffly. His body tensed at the fleet of footsteps approaching the door. Was the whole house waiting for their arrival? Unlike his parents' house, he wasn't welcomed by the warm smell of cookies or some southern casserole. He wouldn't have been surprised to see a personal chef whipping up the courses they were due to feast on. The front door swung open. A far younger-looking Thomas stood in the vestibule. Hey, Natalie and Joseph. Joseph introduced himself. There was an awkward, gaping standoff between the two. Finally, Natalie piped up. May we come in? The man who looked to be in his 30s nodded. He came across as a black Steve Jobs with his glasses, dark turtleneck, and posh demeanor. Joseph hoped he wouldn't be dining with another family member who viewed his background as tactless. This is my brother David, by the way, Natalie whispered into Joseph's ear. They headed into the foyer of her home, hooking their coats in the front closets next to their boots and belongings. Joseph regarded the glasses guy. Nice to meet you, David. Natalie's brother seemed to ease up from the offered handshake. Nice to meet you too, Joseph. He smiled. The dining room would be right this way. Kicking off his shoes and placing them on the shoe rack, Joseph trailed after Natalie and David as they traipsed towards the living room. He tried not to gulp so much as they explored a hallway that was nearly as big as his apartment. Of course, he thought, a family of doctors would be able to afford a house that held as much acreage as all of the bungalows on the street combined. Besides the 3-story column of brick that they inhabited, a large backyard that could fit its own mini house and park could be seen from the driveway, which of course parked a Mercedes and Lambo. Joseph slapped himself out of his hypnosis. Now's not the time to feel inferior, he told himself. This dinner was more than just an innocuous hangout. It was an interview. Natalie's father and potentially even her siblings were going to pluck forth any crimps they could detect in Joseph's character. Stumbling over himself before he even slid into a conversation with them was a recipe for embarrassment later on. He held Natalie's hand until they reached the dining room. It was divided far from the kitchen, although its doorway was no more than an arched alcove. The dining table extended for twice the length of Joseph's family table. Seated atop silk upholstery were two women, one who Joseph recognized as Michelle, whose hair was pressed in a blunt bang pixie cut, the other being a woman who looked to be in her mid-20s. They had both settled in at opposite ends of the table. In the middle, at the farthest end of the dining table, Thomas scraped his butter knife along his plate as he maimed a slab of steak. Poor steak, Joseph thought in pity. Hello, Mom, Dad. Nice to see you too, Sydney. Natalie beamed at her family members. Joseph noticed her voice took a slight growl when she addressed her father. This dinner is not going to be peaches and roses. Thomas cleared his throat. You two are late, he stated matter-of-factly. Joseph darted his eyes anxiously between him and David, who appeared to also be frozen in place. Well, what are you waiting for? The food is getting cold. Natalie, David, and Joseph rushed to pull out chairs along the table. The dining room was softly lit by a candled centerpiece. Joseph watched the flame waver as he sat down beside Natalie. He riveted on the plate in front of him. Wow, I love some Southern smashed potatoes, he chuckled. His dish was a hearty 3 servings of chives and mashed potatoes, steak, and summer peas. Michelle beamed at him. I'm glad to hear you like it. It's been a while since I've gotten in the kitchen thanks to, well, let's all focus on the food and dig in. From the corner of his eye, Joseph saw Natalie's shoulders slump. Crap, I already somehow got into a touchy subject, he thought while squirming for a more comfortable position on his chair. All of the seats at the table looked like the kind that had been seen at a royal procession. Long backrest and glide-resistant legs. The 6 munched in silence. Joseph would periodically raise his head to smile at the other members of the table, hoping to show his appreciation for being hosted despite the cool ambience. No one spoke up. There was a frigid clasp over the room, and he didn't know how to melt it away without risking hostility on his part. So, Joseph, Thomas grunted. He shimmied his tie around his neck. What do you do for a living? Do you have any plans, aspirations, goals? Thomas definitely wasn't Joseph's first choice for parlance, but an utterance was better than nothing. I'm currently in the music industry, he replied curtly. He didn't want to indulge too many details. If he delved too deeply into his career up front, it'd sound like he was a shallow overcompensator. If he evaded the question, he'd come across as a bum. It was best to perform a balancing act. Thomas grunted. Oh, so you're a rapper. He shot an annoyed glance at his wife while exhaling deeply. Michelle, on the other side, looked happily engrossed in their conversation. Joseph brushed off the slight with a laugh. Yeah, I am. Thomas only muttered something under his breath and knifed his steak. What college did you graduate from? Thomas asked. I'm taking a small break from college to focus on music. For some odd reason, it felt like the level of noise in the room, which hitherto had been non-existent, save for the revolving rotisserie, had died down to a vacuum. The only sound Joseph was able to perceive was Sydney nibbling on her steak. Thomas, none the more pleased with his guest, contorted his face and fixated back on his meal. Joseph fidgeted with his steak awkwardly. Wait, so you're a rapper, right? Sydney regarded Joseph with glittering eyes. It was the most emotion she'd shown since he arrived there. Her pink powdered cheeks were framed by a middle part of beach waves. Joseph smiled. I can freestyle. Sydney leaned forward excitingly. Oh my God, so you've had a ton of groupies, right? Tell me, is it true that Drake is with that girl from his newest music video? Or is she no longer an industry pass-around? Sydney, Natalie hissed. She was fuming hot all the way up to her scalp. Seriously? Sydney pouted innocently. I was just curious. Aren't y'all the ones saying I should be more involved in the moment and stop using my phone during dinner? David interjected. There's ways to do that don't set up Joseph to get an industry target on his behind. Whatever. Y'all just sitting here like mutes anyway. Sydney threw her napkin down on the table and leaned back into her chair, folding her arms over her chest like a petulant child. Joseph mused. I guess even the strict families like this one are bound to get their rebels. He felt David's eyes linger on him after the semi-lecture. Hey, why do I think I recognize you from somewhere? David asked, scratching his chin. Joseph shrugged. I don't think we've ever met before. He scrunched up his nose. Now that he mentioned it, David did seem a tad familiar. He might have ascribed it to Natalie's likeness and all the family features at first, but now things were starting to come across differently. Maybe you guys shop somewhere similar, Natalie suggested. A clothing shop, cafe? I got it, Joseph suddenly yelped. We go to the same barber shop, don't we? David's eyes lit up. You go to Patrick too? He reached to give Joseph a proud handshake. He keeps cutting my hair fresh and clean. He ain't ever messed up my hairline. Patrick the man. Joseph bobbed his head eagerly. Patrick had been his barber since entering college. He not only transformed Joseph from an awkward kid with overgrown, unevenly picked coils, but he tapped into a confidence in Joseph that ultimately motivated his moves on Shannon. Of course, he was well aware of where they ended up, but the sweet nostalgia of looking back on how far he came since then made the revelation all the more touching. I'm going to stick with Patrick until my hair falls out. Ain't nobody replacing me on that chair. Him and David both hollered as Natalie spectated amusedly. You guys should go to the barbershop together one day, she said. Would be a nice chance to hang out. Joseph grinned. I'd be down for that, you? David replied. As long as you don't go stealing my style. You don't know how many brothers see me in there and think I'm some mannequin for them to chop and copy swagger off of. The table ascended into laughter, wine glasses clanging as the surface shook from side to side. Only Natalie's dad remained stoic. He cleared his throat with such exaggerated force one would assume he was clearing the phlegm of 1,000 years' worth of bronchitis. I assume some of us spend more time on cosmetics than we do valuing the enrichments of our studies, he grumbled to himself. Or perhaps that'd be a misstatement. After all, the job was like every other that preceded it in the sense of scalding Joseph. Before Joseph could speak, Natalie shot back. I assume some of us are too cranky to take a jokey conversation for what it is, simply fun. She glared daggers into Thomas's cold demeanor. I know how to crack a joke or two, although wits can come easier to those whose entire life can only be summed up as a series of failures, Thomas retorted. Again, Joseph was left scratching his head. Did this man not realize he was sitting right across from him? Natalie laughed mockingly. Yeah, what a great comedian you are, making low blows at my husband for making a decision that has led him to financial and personal success. Unless we're now defining success by insanity, I can't quite see how a delinquent who composes poetry for the vagrants is any better than your local food stamp collector. Michelle gasped. Thomas, don't you dare use that type of language at our table. Thomas's eyes widened as he pointed at his chest. I'm the problem? Michelle, our daughter brought home a man who represents exactly what we've been raising her to avoid for the past 2 decades. Am I supposed to just bow my head and pretend like this isn't debauchery? You can try by making the effort to treat someone important to our child like a decent human being. How about that? Ever since Joseph showed up, you've been all surly and sassy. I'm losing my appetite even listening to your diva rambles. She waved her hand in the air exaggeratedly. The flings of her wrists were to wave away the negativity that bled from Thomas. Thomas shook his head in disbelief. I really don't understand what's gotten into you folk. It's like I'm talking about premonitions or something. He released a heavy groan, slamming his fork into his plate to scoop up the last of his food. Michelle paid no more heed to her husband's tantrums. Joseph, don't think I've forgotten too. You still ain't brought me my soda. She broke into cackles when Joseph's face lit up with recognition. You right. I should have been taking care of that. My bad. Next time I see you, I'm going to have you an ice cold one, I promise, he snickered. Everyone at the table delved into more of their platters. There was a brief pause as Michelle rationed mashed potato seconds along the dining table. Y'all really love some chives and garlic potatoes, huh? She teased. Sydney flapped her hair. I've won a long month without carbs, so one cheat dinner will be okay. Despite nobody inquiring of her dietary liberties, Sydney panned her eyes across the table like she expected someone to attack her small share of whipped potatoes. We live in lavish, eh? David grinned as his second serving met his plate. He collected a heaping spoonful, saying, It's not fair that you introduced a ton about yourself and you barely know anything about us, Joseph. My name is David, as you already know. I'm a practicing doctor, just finishing my residency a year ago. Mike's to Sydney. Sydney slurred her speech boringly. I'm 25, the youngest golden child, and I'm doing my MFA in college. Joseph raised his eyebrow. MFA? Sheesh, you guys are really hard studiers. Sydney smirked at his comment. Professors always say the liberal arts is totally a different ballgame. You can cram all the questions in your head for science and math, but writing? You either know it or you don't. Same thing with psychology. I think I'd make a real good counselor one day, just because I know how to read people. Natalie squinted her eyes at her sister skeptically. Didn't you switch out of your STEM path because you said those same professors you're quoting rigged the bell curve against you? Sydney popped her lips in a noise. There's something called nuance. Oh, and I get it. Emotional complexity is hard for book nerds like you and David to grasp. She rolled her eyes and narrowed in on her food. Joseph wanted to laugh, but he kept his mouth shut. There was another battle brewing on the horizon. To his right, Thomas was already gearing into action to launch another snidey remark. Aren't you going to finish your mashed potatoes, Father? Your food is getting cold. Natalie snarked ahead of him. Thomas's mouth curled into a snarl. Eating too quickly leads to indigestion, and as an older man, I'd rather take my time at the dinner table. He lifted his napkin to dab the edges of his lips. Besides, when you're used to having a beautiful wife cook bountiful meals for you, you don't wolf down the first plate you get like a starving animal. Joseph pressed his eyes shut. Here we go again. Was there even any point of intervening? In less time than it took for him to inhale another breath, Natalie retorted, I guess that's odd, considering Mom isn't often in a hurry to set out a table for your hour-long comedy specials. Oh, she has in fact eaten a lot of meals with me. We all have, together. It's what children do with their parents when they don't run off to different states for shotgun weddings. Thomas's words were laced with resentment. I wonder why it's that out of everyone I didn't write on the guest list, the only disgruntled exception seems to be you, Natalie asked sarcastically. Fathers tell the truth. Your friends may be sparing you the embarrassment of facing reality early on. As tensions boiled in the room, Joseph snuck his phone out of his pocket from under the table. He typed up a lighthearted message to Natalie. The message said, Well, this is going well, with laughing emojis. Natalie was practically quivering out of anger in her chair when she styled at the buzz from her hind pocket. She checked her phone, opened the notification, and giggled. Is something funny? Thomas pried. Natalie smiled thinly at him. Nothing. It's nothing. She exchanged knowing glances with Joseph. Thomas groaned when Michelle suddenly reeled forward on the table. She rested her forehead on her hand, saying, Sorry, y'all. I just started feeling dizzy out of nowhere. Breathing hoarsely, she rubbed her temples. The table fell quiet in worried fixation. Are you okay? Let me get you some ice water, Joseph offered, noting the lemon-accented pitcher had emptied of its contents. Michelle flashed a grateful smile. When Joseph retreated to the kitchen, his eyes wandered to Natalie. He could see her whole family through a small opening in the kitchen's wall. Their faces were tight with anxiety. Confusion, exhaustion, and dread swirled through the air as Michelle's pain only became more visible on her expression. She'll be okay, Joseph half assured himself as he hastily refilled the pitcher. He covered it under the ice dispenser connected to the refrigerator and then refreshed the water with a new lemon slice. He beamed himself the second he was back in Michelle's sight. Here you go. Michelle smiled. Thank you. She only managed to sip before grimacing. It was clear this flare-up wasn't just a minor discomfort. After a prolonged pause, she said, I think we're going to head up to bed for some rest. I'm sorry I won't be able to talk to you longer, Joseph, she said sadly. I'm glad we got to talk, even for a little. At least I'll come prepared with your soda next time, Joseph quipped. He and Michelle chuckled in unison. Chapter 11. 3, 2, 1. Lift! Joseph and Sammy heaved the last section of the big sofa through Natalie's apartment door. Having a handle on the part that was transported inside first, Joseph dropped the sofa down on the floor and waited for Sammy to do the same. Whew, Sammy sighed. He wiped his arms across his damp forehead. That's the last one, isn't it? Joseph collapsed against the nearest wall. He jolted off of it when his back brushed against what felt to be a frame. This is your first day living together. Do not screw things up. Yeah, after nearly 2 hours of this, Joseph respired as much air as he could engulf. Moving up to the topmost level of Natalie's building was truly a workout. He'd definitely not commit to so much furniture the next time if they decided to change places anytime soon. The roar of a machine ended as nifty footsteps approached Joseph and Sammy. Fatigued beyond his senses, Joseph labored to glance at who was coming. Homemade ice cream for hard-working men. Natalie smirked while giving a small bowl to Sammy. She crouched to give another bowl to Joseph. A triple scoop of cookies and cream taunted him in the center. Joseph quickly grasped for the cool ceramic dish. Thank you. You're an angel, Sammy screamed with enthusiasm. Apparently, mango-flavored ice cream was so addictive he was tranced into his own wave of euphoria. Natalie snickered. I'll leave you two to enjoy your treat. She receded to her, or what would now also be Joseph's bedroom. Thank God I got moving my bed out of the way first, Joseph thought as the ache of lugging his bed frame up 1,000 steps set in. That was it. There was one thing he vowed to do the minute he became an official resident here. Complain to the superintendent for allowing a broken elevator to be left to wither during the busiest hours of the weekend. No amount of dessert bribery could goad him out of this confrontation. He glanced at his friend Sammy. I'll be living here now, he said with a tone of reflection. He let his eyes roam over the embroidered linen that draped the living room windows and the memorial beanbag that he lounged beside when he first visited Natalie after their wedding. The periwinkle feathering was just as vivid as it had been the last time he saw it. Sammy walked over to his friend, patting him on the shoulder. I knew y'all were meant for each other since the day at the gas station. Remember? A special girl like Natalie is not one you come by and don't take the first chance you get. She could have slipped out of your grip, but you're lucky that fate was rooting for y'all too. Joseph grinned. I really was. He ruminated over all that had developed between him and Natalie the past few months. The kisses they shared, the intimate nights they passed, the tender giggles she billowed into his ear like a draft of wind. She was his spring, sometimes mellow, weathered down by the downpour of tribulations in her mother's prognosis, other times quick like the wind after heavy rain, the rainbow crescent that shone across the fields, or the dandelion petals that soared to plant seeds in fertile plains. Natalie carried Joseph to new opportunities, new realms he could have never imagined. She could arouse him one moment with her seductive figure and eyes and hypnotize him in her intellect the next. He didn't need or desire to predict her moves because she was perfect no matter what side she showed. Sammy slid off the wall. Dang, that's some good ice cream Natalie made. When you get a chance to creep up on her in the kitchen, remember to send me that recipe, all right? Joseph chuckled. I'll be sure to send you the measurements gram by gram. His friend laughed as he strode to drop his bowl on the table. He then started for the door. I'll catch you later, man. Tell Natalie I said bye, Sammy responded. Joseph gestured in a salute towards him and rose from the floor. Being here still felt surreal to him. He'd been in Natalie's apartment 1,000 times before, but today elicited emotions similar to when they tied the knot. This was a major milestone in their relationship. He saw Natalie leave their bedroom just as he got up. She skittered toward the kitchen table with the stick in her hand. She wordlessly placed it on the table. Joseph approached the object in confusion. All he saw was some thermometer-looking gadget with 2 red lines at the top. What's this supposed to mean? He asked. Something shifted in the air. Natalie had lost her cheeriness from before. Her socks squeaked against the hardwood floor with every step, her body having resigned to moping like a resurrected corpse. Her eyes stared vacantly into the object. I'm pregnant, she stammered, her voice choking up on the last word. Her eyes were already being overtaken by a red glow. Stung like the fragility of her conscience, she quivered as the tears pricked the corners of her eyes. Joseph replayed what she had said. I'm pregnant. Natalie was pregnant. A baby was on the way. Neither of them had expected this to happen. He cupped her cheek in his hand. Don't cry, baby. This is a blessing. We can do this. Natalie gulped down an upshoot of tears. We didn't plan for this, Joseph. I can't help but be nervous. I noticed I was a few weeks late, but when I picked up the test from the store, it was practically just on a whim, just a hunch. And look at me now. She faltered before she could finish her sentence. Heavy labored breaths consumed her body as she struggled to hold herself up on such a strained frame. Joseph supported Natalie by her shoulders. Take slow, deep breaths, Natalie. He directed her respirations just as he fought to control his own worried tremors. They both breathed in and out together. 1, 2, huff. His body didn't feel any less tense after these respirations than it had prior to them. At the very least, he was calmed by going through these emotions with Natalie. It twisted a knot in his stomach to see her look so pale and directionless. They were a married couple, in this for the long run, and he wouldn't allow her to believe he'd abandoned the team they'd promised to uphold with each other. He guided her by the small of her back to his newly moved-in sofa. Their hips touched as he rubbed his hand up and down her arm soothingly. We got this, Natalie. We're a team. 2 heads are definitely enough to figure this out. Natalie didn't betray a peep. She trembled silently by his side, eventually resting her head on his shoulder. Joseph let her snuggle into his broad torso as he thought on the news they'd gotten. He was right about today. Things would be very different from now on. And while he hadn't prepared for the way in which they'd change, he was doubtlessly ready to give his all to make the transition as smooth as possible. All he had to do was try. It was a small sacrifice, and he at least owed that much to Natalie. Natalie stopped by one of the Babies R Us aisles, picking up a tiger plushie from one of the bins. Joseph chuckled. The shopping cart he'd brought to a halt was filled with baby diapers, unisex onesies, and a huge toy set. Daniel the Tiger. He read off the toy sticker label. He peered over Natalie's shoulder as she triggered the speech mechanism. Out of nowhere, the toy went into animatronic mode. My name is Daniel the Tiger. Roar! It raised its robotic palm to mimic a clawing motion. Natalie giggled, sloping onto Joseph's chest. I like this toy. I think we should buy him, she remarked softly. I think we should too. Joseph glid his hand up and down Natalie's arm. Just the thought of the two of them creating their own living masterpiece of art was euphoric. The color palette was endless with various beautiful shades of brown that the two of them could paint together on this canvas of life that was forming within her womb. With their next ultrasound a couple weeks away, they still had no idea on whether they'd be getting a darling little girl or a chocolate little boy. Joseph would be happy to raise either. His head swirled with images of him holding their baby in the air, pushing them to the clouds on the swing and rocking them to bed when Natalie was studying. He was ecstatic for the baby, and judging by the way her heart thumped against his chest, so was Natalie. Harlem Nights? Joseph laughs at her because she has never seen the movie. He tells her that he doesn't understand how she's a grown adult and has not seen this movie. He laughs and says, not even for the culture? Look at Eddie Murphy, Joseph hollered on the brink of laughter. Each time he watched Eddie's character get beat up by the older woman seemed funnier and funnier. Natalie's TV screen flickered with the classic film of the 80s, Harlem Nights. God, movies were so much better back then, Joseph chuckled with starry eyes. Rustling the creases in his shirt with her laughs, Natalie teased. He was a cutie when he was younger too. She indulged in Joseph's playful annoyance at her jibe. I still can't understand how you're a grown adult and have never seen this movie, he said. Natalie seemed to have contemplated a comeback, But after a heavy pause, she shut her lips and reclined into his arms. Joseph assumed she was rendered speechless from how crazy her unfamiliarity sounded, laughing. Not even for the culture? Natalie was now grimacing. She shimmied off of Joseph's lap, moving to the ledge of the white sofa. My stomach's having bad cramps, she grunted. Her grip on her belly tightened as she reeled forward. Whoa there, take deep breaths, Natalie. You good? You want me to get you some water? Joseph was already on top alert. He was poised to fetch a bucket of water from all the way across the Atlantic if she demanded it. Natalie was now 11 weeks into her pregnancy. He didn't know much about what mothers went through before childbirth, but he'd heard of morning sickness and some other ailments that could make it a discomforting experience. Natalie was now exhaling slowly. Crap. Can you heat up some ginger tea for me, please? Joseph immediately sprinted to the kitchen. He clicked the kettle nose open to fill it up with water, then swiveled the switch for the stove to the highest heat. He paced impatiently in and out of the kitchen. Any length of time felt too long for the nozzle to begin billowing smoke. He saw Natalie limp from the living room to their bedroom. He nervously winded around the corner to check if she was okay, then stopped himself. The kettle water was boiling. The next time he met her eyes, he'd be soothing her back to normal with a hot cup of tea. This was only temporary, he thought encouragingly. She'd get better. She had to. Balancing the base of the mug on his palm, Joseph speed walked to the bedroom. Natalie, I'm coming, he called out. There was a slight shuffle from the en-suite washroom. He kicked the bedroom door open with his leg, then proceeded inside. Natalie was slouched next to their closet with her stomach clutched. I'm bleeding, she whispered weakly. Beads of sweat rolled down her forehead. Joseph carefully placed the tea on the dresser. Oh no, baby. Do you want me to take you to the ER? His heart was beating so fast, he hated it. He hated not being able to do anything. Why did Natalie have to suffer through this alone? All he could do was steep a 99-cent tea bag and tell her to drown away her fears. She idled by the closet, respirating heavily. Can we check online first? I don't know if this is normal in the first term or not. Joseph nodded reluctantly. He plucked his phone out of his pocket, searching. What does it mean when I bleed and have cramps during the early stages of my pregnancy? He gave his phone to Natalie before the results popped up. I think you'd be the best judge on what sounds the most like your situation, he explained. Despite his words, the tremor in his grip betrayed a fear to discover what lay on the other side of the diagnosis. Natalie took his phone in her hand, scrolling down the page. Then she clicked on a link. Her eyes widened when she'd only stared at it for a couple of seconds. Joseph, I think we should go to the ER. Now, she grunted. Joseph replied, Okay, I'll drive. You can get into what feels comfiest for you, and we'll be on our way. He looped his hand around Natalie's waist as she struggled to get to their bed. I'll have to take a picture before we leave, just in case they'll need it, Natalie whimpered. Joseph's stomach curled up. How much blood was there that she'd need a photo? Natalie, Joseph called out to her when she exited the ER doctor's room. Her gaze remained on the floor as she stumbled outwards. Her eyes were bloodshot and damp. I got you. We got this. Natalie took a shaky breath. With tears flowing down her face, she uttered the cold words. It's gone. Joseph couldn't find the words at the moment to comfort her. With his assistance, the two of them slowly walked down the hospital hallway toward the parking lot. The air grew chillier with each step she took, yet her limbs launched forward adamantly, too rigid in their escape to lead her backwards. She'd sooner buckle to the cold, cement staircase than she would hear the doctor's caustic diagnosis again replaying in her head. Miss Baker, I'm regretful to inform you that a miscarriage has indeed taken place, Dr. Anderson said. He leaned forward in his leather chair, frowning like he'd shared even half the pain that inflamed her after his observation, like he traipsed through those aisles picking out cute clothes for her precious child to wear. Like he played music to her tummy and fidgeted with toys that had soon become the baby's own to play with. Like he spent long nights wondering if he'd be the best parent the baby could ever have and what could be done if she wasn't ready to assume that role yet. The abundance of tears blurred her vision. This man would never know what it was like to be in her position. This can't be, Natalie stuttered. It can't. I didn't do anything for the baby to... She could hardly articulate her thoughts. Her mind was overtaken by disorder and angst, all bundled into one thorny tangle. The whole conversation with the doctor played over and over in her head. It was like she was trapped in the moment. Her lungs were collapsing in on itself. She shuddered in her chair, clinging to Joseph's arm as the world seemed to blur in front of her. Miss Baker, the doctor shouted from across the hall. Are you feeling unwell? Dr. Anderson walked closer to inspect Natalie's expression, but there was nothing for him to make sense of. She was throttled by sobs she'd never released in her life. It was like a rogue wave had awakened inside of her, and the tide of the crash was crashing out of her body. This can't be true. This can't be true. She fought through tears. The doctor stiffened his posture, reaching for a chair to help Natalie sit down as she squeezed Joseph's hand. Natalie, this is a regular occurrence amongst many women. You are not an abnormality, and no one is at fault with what occurred. But it is best for your health that you do not let this experience define you. He knelt down and put himself at eye level with Natalie's eyes. She slowly turned her head away from him. I want you to take control of this moment that you are in. After your body and mind have overcome the toll of this experience, I'm confident your future pregnancies will show better prospects. Natalie was too weak to keep a firm hold of Joseph's hand. As he sensed her losing strength, he squeezed her hand just a little tighter to let her know that he was with her emotionally. Okay, she said to the doctor while taking a deep breath. He pushed up his spectacles. If you're feeling dizzy, we can check your vitals and have you stay in the hospital a bit longer. There's no hurry to leave the ER, Dr. Anderson offered. Natalie shook her head robotically. Slipping her hand away from Joseph's, she slowly walked away from both of them, staggering toward the emergency exit. With both of her hands placed on the door, she took one last deep breath and walked out. She was too tired to notice whether she shut it with a considerate level of momentum. Judging by the nurse who flinched at the sight of Natalie departing the hospital, the noise likely sounded like a bomb going off. Who cares? Natalie thought as she stumbled toward the parking lot. She was tired of caring, tired of bleeding so much sorrow because of the people she loved. Everyone was slipping away from her. First her mother, now her baby. What did this spell for her future? All she wanted to do was curl into a ball and never wake up again. At least she wouldn't have to face the angst of going through any more tragedies. Several minutes passed as she realized she had only walked a dozen or so feet away from the exit. She'd been standing out in the cold for a while, and behind her, to her obliviousness, Joseph had been lingering nearby with a concerned frown. Natalie rotated as the cold weather started to creep up her skin. She jerked into the stair railing when she saw Joseph. What are you, forget it. She smothered a palm over her forehead. I'm sorry for walking out on you. I just can't believe this is happening. Joseph lagged in her shadow for a moment. The only sounds that surrounded them were the people walking out of the hospital doors to their cars. The way their shoes hit the stairs as they climbed down to the parking lot played a beat to Natalie's ears. She could find solace in this silence, being warmed by the assurance Joseph was nearby, while her emotions weren't regulated to any expectation of presentability. She wasn't ready to be the perfect Natalie Smith she was raised to be. She was traumatized by this incident. Her whole world had to be written over. Slowly, Joseph advanced to her side. He wrapped her in a tight embrace. I love you. We got this. Sometimes it's our journey that makes us. His voice faltered the more he spoke. The news hurt him too. The hopeful newlyweds thought they'd be parents. They would have never foreseen themselves leaving the hospital after suffering a miscarriage. Natalie sobbed in Joseph's arms as they walked back to her car. Joseph drove them back home. Natalie couldn't stop tearing up the entire way back. The inside of the car was a gush of pure emotions. Letting everything go was the only way for her to cope with the pain. It was also the reason why she turned off her phone when it started ringing nonstop through the ride back. She didn't have the energy to talk to anyone. If they had something to tell her, they'd need to wait for some future date. Tonight, she was grieving Daniel the tiger's lost friend. Chapter 12. Natalie groggily rolled over in her bed. The sunlight from her bedroom windows would usually wake her up at this time in the morning with a large hunk cocooning her body and glum skies shrouding them both overhead. There was little sunlight to be gleaned. The world was gray. Natalie had spent the entire night crying. She would finish crying, only to find herself crying again. The tears dampened her pillowcase. Sniffling, Natalie rubbed her eyes. They were swollen and irritated. She was in a dark place mentally and emotionally and had no desire to leave her room. Joseph idled by the other side of the bedroom door, periodically checking in on her. She reached from under a blanket to grab her phone off her bedside table and powered it on, even though she still had absolutely no desire to have any connection with the outside world. She was consumed in solitude. As the phone powered on, the notification bell immediately began to ding back to back to back. All of the notifications came from her family. Perplexed, she called her brother. He'd sent the most messages, which was unusual considering his busy work schedule. She began to fear Joseph had told the family about the miscarriage. She understood the reasoning behind it. They were family, and people she grew up with would know how to comfort her best. But she wanted to relay something like this personally, most of all when she was ready, and she was not feeling confident about herself with these fresh wounds. She'd need a lot more time to heal before others pried into her state of health and mind. Natalie's call to her brother connected quickly. She barely uttered "hey" before he spilled the news. "Mom is gone," he informed bluntly. His tone was coarse and his voice was more gravely than normal. Natalie grimaced through the static in his audio and pressed her phone closer to her ear. "Huh? I can't hear you. It's too noisy where you are." She knew she didn't just hear something about her mom being gone. "She passed away," he said with a lower tone. Out of all things that she could have heard, this could not be happening. There's no way that a mom could be gone. Maybe she was just seriously unlucky. Maybe the world had adapted a sick amusement in her sorrow. Maybe there was no logic to anything that was happening. The only answers to be found were Natalie was compounded with a mountain of problems, and she had no choice but to accept they were happening because she had little power to reverse the straits in her life. David held his hand up to the phone's microphone. "I've been trying to reach you since last night about Mom. She's gone, Natalie." Natalie's jaw slackened. Her phone slipped out of her hand and onto the floor. "Natalie?" At the thump of her phone crashing against the hardwood planks, Joseph ran in the room. "What's wrong?" Natalie was frozen in time. Her eyes reverted between staring blankly ahead and glowing with anger, pain, confusion. Then the tears followed. She was back to the curled up, sobbing ball of fury that she was last night. "Natalie, what's wrong? Did the bleeding start again?" Joseph shook Natalie vigorously, but no response came out. Her tongue was paralyzed out of shock, unlike her limbs, which burst from the turmoil that stirred up inside of her. "My mom," she kept repeating the same jagged phrase over and over. Her eyes raced frantically. Joseph couldn't make out what she was angling towards, but he wasn't numb to emotions. There were few things that could rouse this type of reaction in someone, and he suspected that whatever had pushed Natalie to that point of speechlessness had to be something too great for her to bear on her own. He stood up, walked to the other side of the bed, and pulled her into his arms. He didn't demand more explanation. He just hugged her quietly, letting her melt into his arms. Chapter 13. Clouds painted the skies gray as trees shed their leaves for the arrival of autumn. Natalie sat in a chair close to her mother's tombstone, A green tent hung over her and Joseph, the couple being the only people remaining at the gravesite. Joseph dragged a folded chair to Natalie's side. He pulled out the chair's legs and sat down next to her. "I should have been there," Natalie piped up. Her eyes were wet with the residue from her crying session moments earlier. She could feel another fountain of tears arriving. Only God knew when her sobbing would end. Joseph stared quietly ahead. Michelle Smith, a soul we'll all remember, was inscribed with curlicues on an oval carved stone. He couldn't fathom it. The woman he bantered with not too long ago, the one who made him feel like home, she was gone too soon. It seemed cruel. She deserved more. She was a wonderful soul. She had to have been to create such an inwardly beautiful child as the woman who sat next to him. The world wouldn't stop turning for him and Natalie. He wished it would. He wished that time could halt for just a second, because he'd take the slightest chance he could to grasp why everything spiraled so terribly around them. All he needed was one shot to figure out how to never let Natalie be sad again. He hated to see her like this. "Maybe we moved too fast," she painfully uttered. Joseph's eyes darted towards her. She was fumbling erratically with the skirt of her dress. She, too, was trying to process all of the trauma that piled up the past week. Nothing felt permanent anymore. Without a word, Joseph grabbed her hand and tugged her to the car. Natalie didn't ask where they were going or why. She did not resist when they got to the car and he revved up the engine. All they did was drive. They sat quietly in the car for hours, trees and lakes roaring past them as Joseph drove down numerous highways and roads. Some twisted into others strayed far from civilization. The farther they got from where they started, the more green they began to see in their landscape. Soon, the level terrain spiked up into tall mountains. The scenery transformed into one Natalie was intimately familiar with, but she couldn't discern the reason as she nodded off through her days. Joseph parked the car at a gas station. Right before leaving, he said something. Natalie couldn't remember what it was because she had forgotten how to stimulate her senses. She was completely torn from this world. Then she heard a fizzling noise next to her ears. She glanced at the car window. Joseph had strolled out of the gas station with a classic Coca-Cola can in his hand. Natalie craned her head around. They were in Tennessee, the place where they first met, where he fixed her car and Mom gloated about what a fine gentleman he was when he left. This was where all the pieces in her life seemed to fall into place, where her richest beginning had begun. A smile inched over Natalie's face as he got closer to her passenger door. "Back to the beginning," she remarked when he was in vicinity. Joseph smirked. "Hi, I'm Joseph," he role-played cheekily. His bronze cheekbones glistened under the stars. When has the moon shined this bright? Natalie thought as she absorbed his beauty. He was beautiful. The world around them had started to look beautiful. Grinning, she replied, "Hi, I'm Natalie." Joseph chuckled. He took a step up to her window, leaned forward and rested his arms on the ledge. His eyes twinkled in the moonlight. "Back to the beginning," he uttered breathily. "We are where we're supposed to be." Natalie rolled down the car window. She took his hand through the opening and squeezed it. They were back to the beginning, and she was glad that these roads led back to a man who'd embrace her through anything that came her way. To be continued.